Operation Sandstorm Audiobook. Chapter 1. Scotland, Dawn Raid. The rain hadn't let up all night. It came in sheets across the Highland training area, a steady hiss against the ridges of wet heather and the low stone walls that crisscrossed the glen. Visibility was poor, the kind of misty grey dawn that made even the night vision goggles struggle to pick out detail. Perfect conditions, the instructors had decided, for a simple raid exercise. Major James Havisham, Hawk, to his men, lay prone on a slick slope, peering down into the valley below. The mock target compound squatted in the distance, a cluster of prefabricated huts and shipping containers arranged into the rough shape of a village. It was meant to stand in for a desert insurgent stronghold, though here in northern Scotland the only sand was the grit in his teeth. Hawk shifted his rifle, a Colt Canada L119A2, suppressor fitted, optics capped against the rain. Behind him the troops spread out in fire teams, silent, disciplined, every man in full battle rattle. They had been in the field for 3 days already. Close quarters drills, convoy interdiction, now this dawn assault. The kit was worn but immaculate. GPNVG 18 quad-tube night vision goggles, PEQ 15 laser designators, carbines with foregrips and optics all zeroed to perfection. Each man carried 7 magazines on his rig, plus grenades and breaching charges in waterproofed packs. Hawk's radio cracked quietly in his ear. "Alpha 1 ready. 2 minutes. That was Sergeant Mark Griffiths, Griff, Welsh, irreverent, and the best GPMG gunner Hawk had ever worked with. Griff carried an L7A2 GPMG, the old workhorse updated with rails and optics. He was dug into a firing position on the left flank, the barrel covered in a poncho to keep the rain out. Hawk trusted him to lay down suppressive fire the second they went loud. To the right, Corporal Tariq Khan was hunched over the bulky black box of the comms relay. It looked more like an experimental generator than field kit, antennae, blinking LEDs, and a fiber bundle trailing to a hardened laptop sealed in plastic. Khan swore softly under his breath. Hawk heard the words "bloody quantum sink" and "pissing rain" carried on the breeze. "Problem," Hawk whispered over the net. Khan came back, voice flat. "Unit keeps dropping packets." Scientists said it had run fine in the field. Scientists never been to Scotland in November. "Keep it alive," Hawk replied. "That box is the reason we're out here freezing our bollocks off." A brief chuckle came from Staff Sergeant Alice Morton, the troops medic, tucked into the 2nd Fire Team. She was running final checks on her trauma kit, waterproof shears clipped to her vest, CAT tourniquets neatly stacked on her harness. The others still called her Doc, though she reminded them often enough she was SAS support, not some bloody miracle worker. The assault plan was simple, at least on paper. Alpha Fire Team to breach the compound from the south, Bravo to cover the northern exit, Griff's gun team to hammer the target windows with suppressive bursts, sniper overwatch from Lance Corporals Evans and Doyle lying invisible on the ridge with their L115 A3 rifles chambered in point, 338 Lapua Magnum. Hawk gave the hand signal. His team rose from the wet ground as one, carbines low, safeties off. The Jackal 2 vehicles were staged a kilometre back, engines silent under camo netting, waiting for exfil. Tonight it was legs only. They moved, feet slid over soaked grass, breath ghosting in the damp air, every man spaced, every man aware. Training muscle memory honed over years in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Hawk's eyes never stopped scanning. He felt the rain running down his collar, the weight of the L119A2 in his hands, the familiar thump of gear against his chest rig. The mist opened slightly as they reached the outer wire. Griff's voice came soft and low. "Gun ready." "Execute." The night split with the suppressed crack of rifles, a stutter of tracer as Griff's GPMG chewed into the target windows. Glass and splinters flew, fire teams advanced, controlled, precise. Hawk watched Rook Miller, their young lieutenant, shoulder the breaching shotgun, slam 2 rounds into the lock of the prefab door, and kick it wide, flashbang in, detonation echoing across the valley, and then Alpha Team poured inside. Hawk stayed outside, scanning, watching arcs, listening to the radio chatter, bursts of "clear, clear, left room secure." Then Khan's voice cut across the net again.
"Quantum relay just spiked. Voltage drop. I'm seeing static." The rest of the sentence was lost in a burst of white noise that hissed in Hawk's earpiece. He glanced back at Khan. The corporal was crouched over the unit, rain pelting the metal casing, hands busy on the controls. The LEDs flickered like a heartbeat. Hawk frowned. He didn't like unfamiliar kit in the field. He especially didn't like it misbehaving.
The exercise continued, but Hawk felt something tighten in his gut. He knew trouble when he saw it. Chapter 2, The Village Exercise. The prefab door still hung on a single hinge when Hawk stepped through the threshold. The smell hit first: burned powder, wet particle board, paint, the chemical tang of a spent flashbang. The room beyond was a plywood box painted to look like a mud-brick living space. It held a broken table, 2 overturned chairs, a plastic water can, and a poster curling at the corners. Simulated blood spatter was sprayed on one wall. The training staff had a sense of humor. Alpha Team were already slicing the interior like surgeons. Rook Miller led on the right, rifle tucked, muzzle down a hair, white light strobed and then off again, pulses from a surefire that gave information but tried not to blind his own team. Behind him, Doc Morton ghosted through the door, head on a swivel, counting bodies, eyes quick to the floor for tripwires, wires that would never be there because this was Britain in peacetime, but drilled habit does not ask permission. Clear calls snapped in. Left clear, right clear, hall secure. The language was clipped and exact. It carried years of lessons where imprecision cost blood. Hawk scanned his arcs from the doorway, then cut through the hall. The next room was a typical shoot house compromise. 2 openings, a wardrobe set to create a fatal funnel, a foam mattress on a pallet. A training role player lay on the floor in a bulky paintball mask and a plate carrier with sensor pucks. Blue pellet splashes marked his chest and shoulder. He raised a gloved hand as if to say, "Yes, you got me, now leave me alone." Rook saw the movement, checked the angle of the mask, kept the muzzle down, and stepped past. Good. They had hammered into him that no one points a hot weapon at a face unless it is truly necessary.
Griff's GPMG barked again outside, a short 5-round burst that rattled windows. The old general-purpose gun had a gravelly voice, a deep throat that never changed with the decades. Griff ran it the way it wanted, with patience. He would keep the belt dry under his poncho, shoulders squared, cheek welled light, watching his beaten zone through a rain-beaded optic. Hawk could picture him on that ridge, rain dripping off his nose, grinning like a pirate. The man would have been at home on a long ship.
Khan spoke in Hawk's ear again. The corporal sounded concentrated, not rattled, but there was strain under it. "Quantum box is stable for the moment. I am getting time drift on the clock sync. GPS is clean. The experiment clock is not." "Define time drift," Hawk said, without looking at the ceiling tiles that were not ceiling tiles at all, but open rafters with cable trays. 30 microseconds and climbing. Could be the inverter, could be this weather, could be the scientist is full of it. "Note it and keep the neck clean," Hawk said. He kept moving.
The second fire team took the left corridor. Hawk followed Alpha on the right, where the hall doglegged to a mock courtyard. They had dressed it to look like a courtyard in a desert town with hand-stenciled Arabic that would make any first-year language student wince. A rusting oil drum sat next to a notch in the wall built for a machine gun. A plastic goat lay toppled in the corner. 2 doorways punched into the far wall.
Rook paused at the apex of the dogleg, scanned, then committed. He threw 2 flashes in quick succession. The metal canisters clacked and rolled. Then the shock detonations thumped Hawk's chest. Rook stepped through, pie slicing, caught a figure to his right, center chest, snapped a controlled pair with subsonic pellets that still popped loud inside the room. The target dropped, shouting something that was half curse and half theatrics. Rook used his peripheral to find Morton's shoulder and felt the reassurance like a hand on his back. Team in, team safe. Hawk watched his feet. The floor was slick. He checked every step. He thought about the three worst things in a shoot house: complacency, ego, and speed for its own sake. He had bled men to those. He would not again. The courtyard opened into a long room with a false kitchen. A role player crouched behind the counter with a rubber knife in a glove. The man lunged when Rook's muzzle crossed the corner. Rook's response was automatic. He crashed the counter with his thigh to break the angle and then put the knife man into the laminate with a forearm across the neck and a knee on the hip. Morton flowed around them and cleared the far corner with her light. She clicked the safety on with an audible snick as she moved the muzzle. Deliberate. Clean. "Contact down, knife," Rook called. "Copy," Morton said. "He lives." She gave the role player a friendly kick on the boot and he relaxed theatrically. Rook helped him up. The man muttered something about the state of the counter. Morton keyed her mic low. "Rook, you lean too deep. Less shoulder, more hips next time." "Noted," he said, trying not to sound defensive. "Save the wrestling for after," Griff added on the net, because Griff never missed a chance. Hawk smiled despite himself. It was rain and plywood and paintball masks, but the rhythm was true. The troupe moved like a chess problem that had been solved through long practice. They were not perfect. They were better than that. They were attentive. A pair of muffled cracks drifted in from far uphill. That would be Evans and Doyle on Overwatch, running the .338s. The L115s were lying under a mesh of gorse and wet grass, the long barrels steady on carbon fibre bipods. Schmidt and Bender, scopes fog-resistant, and still complaining about the rain. The snipers would be calling wind left to right, even here. Habit again. They would log shot placement like accountants. Alpha rounded the last corner and stepped into the final room. It had been dressed as a command space, a cheap folding table, a map with lines drawn in whiteboard marker, a laptop with its screen taped over. The red team who ran the role players liked to make this room a trap. Rook read the space, saw nothing obvious, then saw the thing he had missed first. The door behind the map, half height, set too close to the corner. He stopped. He felt the hair raise on his arms. He lifted a flat palm to halt the point man and leaned his head just enough to catch the angle. A shape crouched in the half door, paint mask matte in the corner. The angle was bad for both of them, which meant any attempt to step would put a man in a funnel. Rook made a fast decision. He took one step back, yanked a flashbang free with a rough confidence that had taken years, checked his grip twice in the wet, and skimmed the can low through the half door. He counted without looking. 1, 2. The flashbang detonated in a white pulse that rattled nails in the studwork. He followed in with the light off, moving on memory, counting paces. 2 to the door, 1 left, 1 forward. The target raised a rubber pistol through the afterimage and Rook shot him centre mass with 2 dry clicks because he had run his last pellets 2 rooms back. He flowed through anyway, slammed the man off his balance and took the rubber gun away as if it mattered. Morton came in behind with her pistol up and covered the corner beyond. The target coughed, spat a curse into his mask, and then laughed because the red team also had a sense of humour. "Clear," Rook said, a little breathless. "Clear," Morton echoed. Hawk logged it in silence. He filed Rook's empty click in the part of his brain that kept score. It was not a mark against the lieutenant. It was a reminder to the troop sergeant about pace. Dry mags are teachable. Dry men are not. They worked the building in reverse, secured the prisoners for the exercise, and then flowed out on a prearranged route to the rally point. The rain softened to a fine mist. The valley held the smell of burned powder and wet earth. Far back on the ridge, Griff ran the last belt through the gun with 2 slow strings and then cleared it meticulously because he would not allow a single wet link to corrode in the tray. He folded the bipod, wrapped the receiver with the poncho again, stood, rolled his shoulders, and looked like he was coming off holiday. At the rally point, the instructors were waiting under a sagging gazebo. 3 men in black waterproofs, 1 woman with a clipboard, all with eye protection pushed up on their foreheads and coffee steaming in paper cups. The senior instructor had the beat-up look of a man who had done more real doors than he cared to count. He had the calm to match. "Settle," he said, as the troop formed a semicircle in the rain. "Unload, show clear, last man clear, rifles slung, helmets off. We will do this quickly because I also have no desire to drown here." Magazines out, bolts locked to the rear, chambers checked. The troop moved through the ritual with the focus a ground crew gives an aircraft. When the last man called clear, the instructor folded his arms. Clock was 9 minutes 42 from breach to last room. That is fine. It is not excellent. Your arcs were mostly clean. Alpha 2, you dome-lit your teammate twice. Fix your light discipline. Lieutenant Miller, you owe the red team 1 box of biscuits because you dry-clicked in a fatal funnel and then decided to dominate with your chest. I like the aggression. The gods do not. Corporal Morton, good catch on the left hallway trip line that did not exist. If it had existed, the man behind you would have lost his feet. Sergeant Griffiths, your fire control was as usual entirely, too smug and annoyingly correct.
Griff did a stage bow that made the instructor snort.
The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. She had a neat voice and a way of speaking that refused to be theatrical. 2 safety notes. 1, condensation in NVGs caused 2 men to break stride on the staircase. There is a trick with cat crap anti-fog and warm breath that you all know. Please pretend you remember it. 2, the floor in room 3 is now a skating rink. We will mop it. You will not try to pirouette on it with live weapons. That is all. Hawk looked at his people while the instructors gave detail. He noted who was cold, who was angry, who was humming to keep their heart rate down. He watched Tariq Khan at the edge of the group, the corporal thinking about a black box instead of the last room. Khan's eyes flicked to Hawk and away. Hawk gave him a tiny nod. Later, the briefing wrapped. They broke to kits and thermos flasks and the endless small work that keeps a troop alive. Weapons stripped and checked, optics wiped, magazines refilled with pellets that worked just like real brass when the brain took the hand there. Belts for Griff's gun repacked into pouches and re-waterproofed with a sacrificial bin liner that would not survive the next hour. Morton laid out her medical kit on a poncho and repacked it by muscle memory. She checked every tourniquet by feel. She laid a finger across each label and did not need to read it. Rook changed his shirt under his smock with the awkwardness of a young officer who had not yet learned how to keep a dry layer dry. His chest steamed. He looked at Hawk without quite daring to look at him. Hawk made him wait another minute. Then he walked over and spoke low enough that only the 2 of them would hear. "You did not panic," Hawk said. "You went for a flash when you should have. You did not over-penetrate with your muzzle, and you cleared the corner on a count you could feel. Good. Now the bad. You dry-clicked. You knew your count was low, and you pushed into a fatal funnel. That is how people like me end up telling people like your mother that you were very brave. Next time you feel low, you say the word, and you feed a fresh mag, or you yield the corner and let the man behind you deal with it. He is not there to polish your brass." "Yes, sir," Rook said. He had the sense not to argue. "Also," Hawk said, "you are carrying too much on your front. You are bulking your drawer, and you are snagging every doorframe like a drunk in a pub. Fix your rig. Ask Griff to help if your pride can take it." He started life as a wardrobe. Rook tried not to smile and failed. "Yes, sir." Hawk left him and crossed to Khan, who had the comms array open on its hinges. The guts were all sharp edges and cooling fins, slick in the damp. A seal around the lid had a bubble in it that looked like a bad weld. The fiber bundle ran to the hardened laptop that showed a diagnostic page in a sans serif font, like a student project that had accidentally found a government budget line. Khan spoke before Hawk could. The unit is reading nominal voltage draw for the inverter and load. The atomic clock on the experiment board is not stable. The drift was 30 microseconds during the assault. It is now 41. It corrects. Then it drifts again. The GCHQ man told me that is expected under certain conditions. He did not define those conditions. Of course he did not. Could be damp, Hawk said, because an officer needs to say something that sounds like a question. Could be cold soak. Could be, Khan said. He tapped the housing with the back of a glove. Could be, the box is a lie. Hawk looked at the nearest instructor, who was studiously not listening. He glanced back at the array. What happens if it goes noisy during a run? Hawk asked. Do we lose net, or do we lose more? We lose net, Khan said. He hesitated. Probably. The scientist says the unit trains an entanglement at the lab and maintains it with a key we carry here. That is his party piece. The reality is we are carrying a heavy battery and a clock that wants to be in a lab. I am worried about interference with our own radios when this thing pulses. Keep it as quiet as you can, Hawk said. If it spikes during movement, you tell me even if I am halfway through breaching the Almighty's front door. Copy that, Khan said. They moved again after 10 minutes. The rain had eased to drizzle. The instructors had swapped targets in the compound and reset the sensors. Round 2 would run with different door positions because repetition breeds lazy eyes. Hawk split the troop in a new configuration, put Rook second in stack behind a veteran corporal who would bully him by existing, and gave Griff a lateral shift that would force him to find his fire lanes without loving his last position. The snipers traded rifles to force a reset of feel. Morton rotated 2 medics through the stack with her and took a radio for casualty control because she believed in training the next person to take your job, not guarding it. The second run was faster and cleaner. The calls were crisper. Rook fed a fresh mag without being asked and did not click on anyone's face. Griff walked the beaten zone like a tailor, stitches evenly spaced. Khan reported the quantum box holding stable, drift oscillating, but within the lower band. The instructors said as little as possible at the debrief, which is the clearest praise they ever give. Jackals came up after lunch. Engines throbbed low, tires chirped on wet gravel. Exhaust steam drifted in a white cloud that smelled of diesel and damp. The vehicles looked like insects built by a minimalist, all angles and exposed suspension, with .50 cals and grenade machine guns swinging on ring mounts. Drivers eased them into a line, hand signals, sharp and economical. Hawk put men on the mounts, tested traverse and elevation, checked safeties, checked the bite of the mounts, checked the strap lengths on the gunners, because loose straps become lost teeth. They ran a mounted live fire lane in the afternoon. The Jackals rolled at 15 kilometers per hour across a field that tried to be a swamp and failed. Targets popped from the damp hillsides. The gunners learned to ride the bounce, not fight it. Griff took the ring in the second vehicle and ran the GMG like he was born with it. The timed grenades arced with lazy grace, then burst on a berm with dull whomps that flattened the grass and tossed sod. The gun wanted to climb. Griff leaned into the sling and held it like a stubborn dog. Hawk stood on a rise with a range safety officer and watched the line work. He felt the way a musician feels the orchestra, small errors rippling forward, small perfections cancelling them. The safety officer had the deadpan of a man who trusted his ear protection more than God. "You are running them on a tight rope," the safety said.
"I am running them where they will have to be when no one is watching," Hawk said.
The man nodded as if that were a cliché and also true. Later, in the fading light, they ran a night infiltration. No shouting, no bangs. The twins of discipline and patience. NVGS down, IR strobes cold. The goggles turned the world into grainy green with black holes where the rain ate contrast. Footfalls were intentions, not sounds. They crossed a bog on a line of rocks that would not hold a cat. Morton caught a man by the collar when he misjudged a step, and kept him from a bootful that would have taken his attention for an hour. Rook counted paces and breaths and felt his slow pride when he reached the same tree he had marked during recce without a light. They reached the objective and did not go in. Hawk held them 20 meters off and made them wait 30 minutes in the wet. It was a lesson he learned from men older than him. Sometimes not going in is the hardest work you will do. When they finally pulled back, the rain had settled into a fine mist that made the head torch beams look like ropes. The camp hummed with small noises, stoves, zips, the soft curses of men fighting with wet laces. A Chinook drummed far out of sight, and then was gone. The glen held the echoes like a bowl. Hawk took his notebook into the admin tent. The canvas smelled of damp nylon, plastic crates and gas. The GCHQ scientist sat at the folding table with a laptop that had no logos. He was in his 30s, pale, hair that did not know what to do with itself. He wore a waterproof that looked new. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose when Hawk entered, which told Hawk this would be a conversation the man did not want to have twice. "Major," the scientist said, trying to sound military and landing somewhere near polite. "Thank you for accommodating the array during your serials. We are collecting useful data."
"Your box is drifting," Hawk said. He kept his tone neutral. "My corporal does not like that."
The scientist nodded as if he had been waiting for the line. "We expect some instability in the rubidium standard under field conditions," he said. "The system uses a set of entangled photon pairs generated at Malvern. The local unit maintains phase-through correction keys sent over the conventional link. In heavy moisture and electromagnetic noise, the local oscillator can lose lock." "Then it should not be in my field," Hawk said. He kept the words level. "I'm not trying to be difficult. My men are carrying weight that does not save a life." The scientist looked at his hands and then at the laptop. "We have a limited window," he said. "There is a particular alignment of variables that will occur tomorrow morning during your next serial. I will not waste your time with the mathematics. I need the array powered, and outside, during that period, I need your men moving. The data could be important." Hawk looked at him for a long second. He could see the man was not being arrogant. He was being scared about a thing he did not know how to explain without sounding like a charlatan. "What happens if it goes wrong?" Hawk asked. "It will not," the scientist said. He hesitated. "We do not expect it to." Hawk nodded once. He closed his notebook. He thought about men and weight and weather and how the army always finds room in a rucksack for one more clever box. He walked back out into the night and felt the rain close around him like a curtain. At the edge of camp, Griff sat on an ammo can, smoking like a man enjoying a small crime. He flicked ash into a puddle and looked up. "Tomorrow the wizards want us to dance while they wave their wands," Griff said, "because news travels faster than radios." "Tomorrow we do our job," Hawk said, "and we do it without confusing clever with useful." Griff grinned and stubbed the cigarette out with the heel of his glove. He stood, stretched, joints popping, and looked up at the cloud ceiling. "Long as you say when, boss." "I will," Hawk said. He did a last circuit of the lines. He checked the batteries on the handsets himself. He felt each sling for frayed stitching. He put a hand on the bonnet of each jackal and learned their temperatures like a medic takes a pulse. He stopped at Khan's tent and saw the glow of the laptop through the canvas. He did not go in. He let the man work without feeling his commander watching. When he finally lay down in his bivvy under a tarp that sighed with the weight of new rain, he let himself listen to the quiet. He thought of the scientist's careful words and the drift that did not want to settle. He thought of the way the valley had held the sound of the Chinook as if it did not want to let it go. He thought of the map of tomorrow's lane and the places a man could slip when he is thinking about clocks instead of corners. He slept like a soldier, hard, ready to wake to the radio, dreamless. Or if he dreamed, he did not remember it. Only the feeling of rain on his face that seeped into everything and stayed. Chapter 3. Jackals in the Glen. The morning broke with a brittle light. The highland rain had eased overnight, leaving the hills shrouded in mist and the ground soft underfoot. Hawk stood by the fuel bowser, hands in his smock pockets, watching the mechanics work on the jackals. The vehicles looked alien against the Scottish landscape, bare-boned, angular patrol wagons with exposed suspension and heavy weapons mounted like afterthoughts. They were built for deserts and dry wadis, not bogs and granite. The troop formed around them with the kind of subdued chatter that followed a night of cold bivvies. Helmets were clipped on, ear defenders adjusted, gloves checked twice. The air smelled of diesel and damp canvas. "Mount up!" Hawk ordered, his voice carrying flat across the valley. Engines coughed to life, one after another, the sound bouncing between the ridges, 4 Jackal 2s in line, each with a 3-man crew, driver, commander, gunner. Griff claimed the second ring mount without asking permission, his grin as wide as the .50 caliber he cradled. "Bloody luxury," he muttered, checking the traverse. "Like an armchair with teeth." The drivers eased the wagons forward into the mud. Tires bit, slipped, then found purchase. The convoy rolled downrange toward the live fire lane, where targets were hidden among the folds of ground. Hawk rode in the lead vehicle, standing half out of the hatch, one hand steady on the roll cage. The rain had stopped, but the wind cut sharp. He pulled his smock tighter and let his eyes travel the line. The troop looked steady, no wasted movement, no slack posture, exactly how it should be. They crested the first rise. The safety officer at the range tower raised a green flag. Hawk gave the hand signal. "Open up!" The first Jackal's gunner swung the mount and squeezed. The .50 caliber roared, deep and steady, brass clattering against the deck. Targets on the hillside shattered under the impact, dirt and splinters thrown into the air. The second Jackal followed with its grenade machine gun, thump, 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 airburst grenades peppering the slope with concussive blasts. Griff whooped into the mic. "Now that's more like it!" "Control your arcs," Hawk cut in. "Stay on your lane." The convoy rolled forward at a crawl, drivers holding speed despite the swampy ground. Gunners fought the mounts against the bounce, learning to ride with the vehicle instead of fighting it. Controlled bursts, reload drills, every man soaked in the rhythm of noise and movement. On Overwatch, Evans and Doyle lay flat with their L115s. Each crack of the sniper rifles came like punctuation, cutting down distant silhouettes that the Jackals had missed. Their spotter scopes tracked wind across the valley, rain still in the air, but thinning as the morning stretched. Inside the lead vehicle, Khan sat hunched over the quantum comms unit, laptop balanced on his knees. The relay case vibrated faintly with each gun burst. Numbers scrolled across the screen in real time. Clock drift, phase variance, error correction packets. He frowned. "Boxes picking up harmonics from the recoil," he reported. "Drifts still oscillating." "Will it bite us?" Hawk asked, eyes never leaving the lane.
"Not yet," Khan said. His tone suggested he didn't trust his own words.
The convoy cleared the final ridge and the last set of targets appeared. Metal silhouettes painted black, half hidden in scrub. Hawk gave the cut signal. The gunners let the weapons fall silent. The echoes faded into the mist, leaving only the tick of hot barrels and the low rumble of idling engines. "Good run," Hawk said. "Into the net? Clean your guns, repack belts. Same again this afternoon, but faster." Griff laughed over comms. "Faster, aye?" "Someone tell the weather to harden the ground first." "Shut it, Griff," Morton said. "You'll get your chance to break something." They rolled back into camp, tires caked in mud, barrels steaming. Hawk climbed down from his mount and stretched, vertebrae cracking. He walked the line, running a hand along each jackal's bonnet like a doctor taking pulses. He paused at Khan's vehicle. The corporal was still bent over the relay, face drawn tight. Hawk tapped the casing with a knuckle. "Still drifting?" "Still drifting," Khan said. "Doesn't like the recoil. Doesn't like the weather. Doesn't like Scotland." "None of us do," Hawk said. "Keep it alive until the test tomorrow. That's all they care about."
Khan nodded, though his eyes didn't leave the jittering numbers on the screen.
Hawk moved on. The troop busied themselves stripping weapons, clearing links, wiping optics dry. Small work, but important. The kind of work that saved lives. He looked out across the glen. Mist still clung to the ridges, softening the edges of rock and grass. Somewhere beyond that grey veil lay a future he couldn't yet see, and a piece of kit humming quietly that made him uneasy. Chapter 4. Night Infiltration. The rain came back in the evening, a steady curtain that turned the glen into a basin of shadows and silver lines. The mist hung low, swallowing the tops of the ridges, muffling sound. Perfect conditions for a night infiltration. Hawk stood at the edge of the assembly area with his troop gathered in a low crouch around him. The light discipline was absolute. Red filters on head torches, NVGs already down, every weapon on safe but ready. The instructors had laid a course, cross 2 kilometers of mixed terrain, avoid detection by roving patrols, then observe and mark a simulated target compound. No loud contact, no noise, no mistakes. He kept the briefing short. Keep spacing. No chatter unless it's on net and necessary. Remember your footwork. Stay on your arcs. If you get separated, rally at checkpoint 3. If you get caught, I will deny ever knowing you. A few smiles, mostly tight. Everyone knew the real point of the exercise. The red team would be out there with night optics of their own, waiting to catch them cutting corners. The troop set off. The ground was slick, sucking at boots. NVGs turned the world into grainy green. Tree trunks loomed like pale sentries, the wet grass shining like glass shards. Every step was a lesson in weight and balance. Roll on the outside of the foot, avoid rocks, keep the knees bent. Rook Miller was in the middle of the stack, still learning the rhythm. He felt the strain in his calves, the NVGs heavy on his face, his rifle a constant reminder to keep the muzzle down and the safety thumbed. He was trying to count paces, but the mud and uneven ground broke the count every time. Ahead of him, Morton moved like water. Shoulders low, head steady, rifle tucked in, her kit making no sound. At the rear, Griff hummed softly under his breath, some Welsh hymn twisted into a parody. Morton hissed over the net. "Griff, if you don't shut it, I'll tape your mouth shut."
"You'll miss me when I'm gone," Griff whispered back, but his voice carried the grin Hawk could almost feel.
The line stopped at a small stream. Hawk raised his fist. The water was only shin-deep, but fast and loud. He gestured, and they crossed one at a time, rifles high, boots sinking into the gravel. Khan nearly lost his footing halfway, the comms box on his back, shifting dangerously. Morton grabbed his webbing and steadied him without a word. "Bloody thing weighs more every mile," Khan muttered once they were across.
"Kit doesn't get lighter," Hawk said. "You get stronger or you go home."
They pushed on. Half an hour later, Hawk called a halt. He crouched behind a rise and raised his hand again. 2 red team patrols were moving across the valley floor below, NVGs glowing faintly, weapons at low ready. The instructors had spared no effort tonight. "Evans, Doyle," Hawk whispered. "Eyes on." The snipers shifted on their bellies, scopes sweeping the patrols. They logged positions, counted heads. Hawk checked his watch, made the call. They would wait. The troop stayed prone for 25 minutes in the wet grass. The rain soaked their smocks, the cold crept into joints, but no one moved, no one fidgeted. Morton whispered once over the net. "This is the part they never show in recruitment ads." Griff replied, "Aye, they cut the glamour bits out." When the patrols finally passed, Hawk gave the signal. The troops slid down slope, hugging shadows, moving like ghosts. They reached the final observation point just before midnight. The compound was a cluster of dark tents lit by 2 dim lanterns. Red Team sentries walked lazy arcs. Hawk raised his thermal monocular, scanned logged guard patterns. He made the notes in his waterproof notebook, short, sharp lines, arrows, timings. He handed the monocular to Rook, forcing him to learn the feel. "See the gaps?" Hawk asked. Rook nodded, the heat signatures glowing bright in his eyes. "Yeah, about 20 seconds blind spot between the east sentry and the west one." "Good. You'll brief that in the morning." Hawk clapped him once on the shoulder. "Learn to see what others miss." That's the job. They pulled back by a different route, moving slow, careful, watching for patrols. No one spoke except for calls on the net. The silence was heavier than the rain. Back at the bivvy site, they stripped wet gear, hung smocks under tarps, boiled water in jet boils that hissed like angry insects. Steam rose from mugs of tea laced with ration sugar. Boots steamed on the edges of the tarps. Morton checked feet for blisters and muttered about men who never learned to change socks. Griff spun some story about a goat in Kandahar that made the younger lads laugh. Even Hawk let a small smile slip. Khan sat apart, the quantum box open again, its LEDs pulsing faintly in the dark. He frowned at the laptop screen, muttering numbers. Hawk walked over. "Still drifting?" Khan didn't look up. "Still drifting. Worse when the rain's heavy. It's like it's listening to something we can't hear."
Hawk stared at the pulsing light, feeling that tightness in his gut again. He said nothing. The rain tapped harder on the tarp, steady as a clock.
He turned in late, bivvy slick with condensation, the smell of wet nylon and diesel thick in the air. His last thought before sleep was the box, blinking its rhythm as if counting down to something unseen. Chapter 5, Command and Politics. The admin tent smelled of wet canvas, paraffin heaters, and instant coffee. Hawk ducked inside, tugging off his gloves, rain dripping from his smock onto the rubberized flooring. The rest of the troop were catching a few hours' sleep under tarps or stripping down their rifles for the 3rd time that day. Here, it was different. The tent had tables, laptops, and a projector humming quietly against the pockmarked wall. 3 men in suits sat stiffly at the far end. They looked out of place in the field, collars damp and shoes sinking into the mud whenever they left the tent. Ministry of Defense liaison officers, all short hair and clipped vowels, trying hard not to look like bureaucrats in borrowed waterproofs. Between them sat the GCHQ scientist, the one who had brought the box. He had the pale skin of someone who had lived too long under fluorescent lights, and his glasses slid down his nose when he spoke. "Major Havisham," one of the MOD men said as Hawk entered, nodding once, eyes cool. "Take a seat." Hawk didn't sit. He preferred to stand, weight on his heels, arms folded. "You wanted me?" The scientist cleared his throat. His voice was soft, precise, as though he was giving a lecture. "Tomorrow morning, around 600, the conditions will be optimal for the test. We'll need your troop in the field with the array powered and transmitting during maneuver." "What kind of conditions?" Hawk asked. "Geomagnetic alignment," the scientist said, hesitating slightly. "A combination of atmospheric and solar variables that affect the stability of the entangled pairs. It's rare. We need to capture data while it lasts." Hawk stared at him. "English, please." "My corporal says your clock is drifting and your box doesn't like the weather. If it fries our radios or compromises the troop in the middle of a run, that's my men at risk. You're asking us to carry live rounds, live bodies, and a box that can't handle Scottish rain. One of the MOD men leaned forward, voice clipped. "Major, you've been ordered to support this test. We're not here to debate the science."
Hawk's eyes didn't move. "I'm not debating. I'm telling you what happens when kit fails under fire."
The scientist raised both hands, placating. "The instability is within tolerance. The drift is measurable, but not catastrophic. You'll have full comms redundancy. Think of it as—" He stopped, searching for a word, "as running 2 radios instead of 1. If one fails, the other is still alive. The array is the second." "Then why the secrecy?" Hawk asked.
No one answered for a long moment. The only sound was the heater ticking, fighting against the damp. Finally, the scientist spoke again, quieter. "Because this isn't just a communications test. It's exploratory. We're studying what happens when you push entanglement beyond theoretical range, real-world conditions, real-world stress. There are things we don't know yet. That's why we need your troop."
Hawk's jaw tightened. "Exploratory." He spat the word like grit. "So we're guinea pigs." The MOD officer cut in sharply. "You're soldiers. You follow orders." Hawk didn't blink. His voice stayed calm, but the steel in it was unmistakable. "I'm responsible for 16 lives. If you want me to run them through your experiment, you'll tell me what risk I'm carrying. Not in your language, in mine." The scientist looked down at his hands. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, then spoke with the tone of a man cornered by his own conscience. "There's a possibility the array could behave unpredictably if the environmental variables spike. A surge, a phase anomaly, nothing that would harm the unit directly, but the output might not be aligned with our models." "Define not aligned," Hawk pressed.
The scientist shook his head. "We don't know."
That hung in the tent like smoke. The MOD suits shifted in their chairs, not meeting Hawk's eyes. Hawk let the silence stretch. Then he leaned forward, voice low. "My men carry what you give them. They'll put themselves where you tell them. But if this box of yours does something you can't predict, you'll answer for it. Not in the report." "To me?" The scientist nodded once, pale, shaken. The MOD men stayed silent. Hawk straightened, turned, and left the tent. The rain hit his face like cold needles. He walked the lines, boots sinking into mud, the night lit by the soft glow of chemlight strung under tarps. Griff was crouched over a GPMG, oil rag in hand, humming the same half-song from the infiltration. He looked up as Hawk passed. "What's the word from the wizards, boss? Are we all going to grow a third arm tomorrow?" "Get some sleep," Hawk said. "Big day." Griff grinned. "That's not a no." Morton was hunched in her bivvy, torch beam muted under her poncho, scribbling notes into a waterproof pad, casualty drills, kit checks. She didn't look up, but she said quietly, "You don't like what they're asking, do you?" Hawk paused, then answered simply, "No, but we'll do it anyway." Khan was awake too, still hunched over the quantum box, its LEDs pulsing a steady rhythm. He didn't look up as Hawk approached. "It's still drifting," Khan said, as if continuing a conversation they'd never started. "Every time I reset, it comes back." Hawk looked at the unit, then at the dark ridges beyond the camp. A wind moved the rain in sheets, whispering through the glen. "Keep it alive," Hawk said at last. "Tomorrow we'll see what it really does."
He walked back to his tarp, lay down in the dark, and listened to the rain. Somewhere in the night, the box blinked on, steady as a heartbeat, waiting for dawn.
Chapter 6. Between Storms. The rain finally eased sometime before dawn, leaving the camp soaked but quiet. Mist still clung to the slopes, heavy and low, as if the hills themselves were reluctant to reveal what lay beyond. Hawk rose before the rest, brewed a mug of instant coffee that tasted of burnt rubber and tin, and walked the perimeter. He liked the silence before Reveille, the few minutes where the world was his alone. The jackals sat under their nets like patient animals, steam rising from their bonnets. Rifles were propped against ammo crates, magazines laid out in neat rows under tarps. The troop slept in staggered shifts, some curled in bivy bags, some sitting upright with rifles across their knees, heads tilted forward. They had the worn look of men who could sleep anywhere, in any position, in any weather. Griff was already awake. Of course he was. He crouched by his gun, cigarette smouldering low between two fingers, cupping it against the damp. "You're going to kill yourself with those," Hawk said as he approached. Griff gave a lopsided grin. "Boss, everything in here is trying to kill us. This just lets me pick the schedule." He exhaled smoke and wiped the condensation off the GPMG's receiver with his sleeve. The weapon gleamed even in the dim light, oiled and ready. Hawk noted it without comment. Griff would keep his gun cleaner than his lungs. Across the camp, Morton sat cross-legged under a poncho, kit spread out in front of her like a surgeon before an operation. She was checking each piece by touch alone, tourniquets stretched and released, field dressings unwrapped and repacked, saline bags squeezed and resealed. She muttered under her breath, counting in a rhythm only she understood. "Morning, Doc," Hawk said. She glanced up, face pale in the mist. "Morning, sir. I've patched blisters on 3 pairs of feet already. If this weather keeps up, I'll be amputating toes before the enemy gets a chance." "Keep them honest," Hawk said.
"They're soldiers," she replied. "Honesty's not their problem." "Discipline is." Nearby, Khan was already at work. The quantum box was open again, LEDs flickering faintly. He had stripped it down to bare circuits and boards, tools scattered in a neat semicircle on a waterproof mat. His expression was tight, jaw clenched. "Still drifting?" Hawk asked.
"Worse," Khan said without looking up. "But it's predictable, almost like it's breathing. Machines don't breathe."
Khan finally met his eyes. "This one acts like it does."
Before Hawk could respond, Rook stumbled out of his bivvy, hair plastered to his forehead, rifle slung awkwardly across his chest. He looked every bit the junior officer, eager, restless, not yet polished. He saw Hawk and snapped to a too-sharp salute. "Sir, ready for orders." Hawk suppressed a sigh. "At ease, Lieutenant." "You'll wear your arm out with that." Rook flushed and dropped the salute. "Just trying to set an example, sir." "You are," Hawk said evenly, "but the example you set is that you're still learning." "Which is fine, because you are." He let that hang for a moment, then softened it. "You'll lead Bravo on the lane today. Make sure your arcs are clear and your men tighter than last night." "Yes, sir," Rook said, determination flickering in his eyes. The troop stirred as the mist lifted, men dragging themselves out of bivvies, shaking off the night's damp. The camp filled with the small sounds of soldiers in routine, zips rasping, Velcro tearing, boots stamping to drive out the cold. Evans and Doyle cleaned their sniper rifles with the reverence of priests tending relics. One of the younger corporals argued quietly with his driver about the jackal's suspension. Someone passed around a dented thermos of tea that tasted faintly of diesel. Hawk let it all wash over him, the noise and banter and discipline. This was the heartbeat of a troop, not the gunfire, not the violence, but the rituals that kept men steady. The quiet confidence that each would pull his weight when it mattered. He turned his eyes toward the valley beyond. The mist was thinning now, revealing the line of hills that marked the edge of the training range. Tomorrow, if the scientists had their way, they'd run the live test with the quantum box humming in the back of a jackal. Hawk felt the weight of that in his chest, the unease, the unanswered questions. For now, though, he focused on his troop. He watched Griff polish a gun, Morton pack her kit, Khan mutter at a machine, Rook struggle to look like he belonged, and the rest quietly go about the business of soldiers preparing for whatever came next. Chapter 7. The Test. The morning had a brittle clarity, the kind that comes after a storm. The highlands were washed clean, the heather dark and glistening, the glen filled with a faint white mist. Hawk stood on the hatch rim of the lead Jackal, scanning the ridgeline as the troop moved out. Engines growled low, tyres slapped against wet gravel, weapons clattered as the gunners adjusted their mounts. It should have felt like any other run, but the quantum box in the second vehicle pulsed with a rhythm that set Hawk's teeth on edge. The hum carried through the convoy, faint but insistent, like a note just out of tune. "Alpha 1, good to go," Griff reported, voice tight over the net. "Targets up ahead." The first ridge gave way to steel silhouettes popping from the ground. The gunners opened up on command. The 50s thundered, the GMGS thumped, tracer arced across the valley, mud splashed, earth tore open. Routine, muscle memory. The troop flowed like they always did, each man knowing his role. But the mist ahead was wrong. It didn't drift like highland fog. It held its ground, dense and opaque, a wall that swallowed the horizon. "Khan," Hawk called, "how's your toy holding up?" "Drifts off the chart," Khan replied, hunched over the laptop. "Correction cycles aren't sticking." I've never seen it spike like this.
"Keep it alive," Hawk said. "We finish the run, then we talk." The Jackals climbed the ridge and dropped into the mist.
Everything changed. The sound went first. Engines dulled, gunfire muffled, radios dissolved into static. The light shifted, greyer, flatter, as if the sun had been veiled. Hawk felt the air pressure thicken, his ears popping like altitude sickness. He gripped the roll cage, forcing himself to stay steady. "Convoy, steady," he ordered. "Eyes open." "Keep spacing."
The fog wrapped around them like wet cloth. Shapes dissolved 10 meters out. Hawk could just make out the second Jackal in his mirror. Khan bent over the box, LEDs flaring white-blue, casting hard shadows across his face. The mist shimmered in time with the pulses, light, bending in unnatural ripples.
Then the ground shifted. Not violently, not like an explosion, more like the earth itself had been swapped. The tyres no longer hissed on wet gravel. They crunched, dry, loose, granular. Hawk blinked down at the track. Not mud, sand. He froze. "Driver, halt!" Hawk snapped. The Jackal jolted to a stop. The others did the same, engines idling low. The mist thinned, peeled away like smoke in a breeze. The valley was gone. No ridges, no stone walls, no dripping pines. Instead, the world opened wide, sand plains rolling into low dunes, scattered rock outcrops, the shimmer of heat, already rising though it was barely morning. The air smelled dry, metallic, baked. Nobody spoke at first. The convoy sat there in the silence, engines grumbling against the alien stillness. The troops scanned instinctively, rifles out, optics up, trying to orient to terrain that didn't match any map. Griff's voice finally broke the net, low and strained. "Boss, tell me this is part of the exercise." "Negative," Hawk said flatly, though the word did nothing to ease the knot in his gut. Morton leaned from her vehicle, NVGs up, squinting at the horizon. "This isn't Scotland, not even close. Look at the sun, look at the sky."
Hawk raised his compass. The needle spun uselessly, refusing to settle. He shoved it back in his pocket. "Dismount! Establish perimeter!"
The troop moved automatically, soldiers falling into drills when their brains had no answers. They took up arcs around the convoy, optics sweeping, weapons steady. Evans and Doyle dragged their sniper rifles onto a dune and laid prone, scopes hunting for movement. The desert gave nothing back. Just heat. Just silence. Khan crouched by the box, fingers dancing across the keyboard, muttering numbers. Hawk walked over. "Talk to me." Khan shook his head. "Readings don't make sense. Power spike, then drop. It's not even on grid anymore. I don't know what we're looking at."
"Where the hell are we?" Rook asked, too loud. His voice cracked in the comms. "We drove into mist, and now we're—" "What? Somewhere in bloody Morocco?" "Shut it!" Hawk snapped. "We get bearings first." Talk later.
He climbed the nearest dune, boots slipping in the dry sand. At the crest, he stopped, chest tightening. The desert rolled out in every direction, endless and unfamiliar. No mountains, no roads, no towers, no highlands, just heat haze and sky. And then sound, distant, faint at first. Hawk narrowed his eyes. Engines. Not diesel. A different timbre. Higher pitched, radial. The thrum grew louder. He turned just as the first aircraft came into view, cutting low across the desert sky. Twin engines, angular wings, shark nose.
He knew the silhouette. He'd seen it in books, in museums, in documentaries. A Junkers Jew 88 bomber.
He forced himself to breathe, to stay steady. "Eyes up," Hawk said into the net, voice level. "We're not in Scotland anymore." Chapter 8. Shock and Survival. The convoy idled in the sand like stranded ships, engines grumbling in protest against the heat. A faint shimmer rose from the dunes, bending the air, making the horizon quiver. Hawk stood at the crest of the dune, scanning 360 degrees with binoculars. Nothing but sand, rock, and the drifting specks of the Junkers formation fading into the east. He lowered the optics. His throat was dry already, lips tacky with dust. He knew exactly what his men were thinking, even if none of them had said it yet. This isn't Scotland, this isn't training, and nothing about it makes sense. Perimeter up, vehicles in all-round defence, arcs locked, eyes sharp, Hawk ordered over the net. His voice was calm, clipped, controlled, the tone men anchor themselves to when everything else unravels. The troop obeyed without question. Rook jumped down from his jackal, checking arcs too quickly, eyes wide. Morton moved with steady precision, setting a firing position by a rock outcrop, checking water first, weapon second. Evans and Doyle belly-crawled up the dune beside Hawk, L115S laid out in the sand, scopes glinting in the sun. Griff slapped the GPMP's receiver, muttering, "Gun's good." "Man's not." He scanned his beaten zone anyway, the humour only half-forced. Khan crouched in the shade of the second jackal, the quantum box still humming weakly. The LEDs no longer pulsed in rhythm. They flickered erratically, sometimes bright, sometimes dull, like a heartbeat losing sync. His laptop showed nonsense, timestamps running backward, GPS readouts frozen, system clocks rolling over into dates that didn't exist. "Talk to me," Hawk said, crouching beside him.
Khan wiped sweat from his forehead. It's dead and alive at the same time. No grid, no satellites, local clock drift's gone off the chart. I can't even tell you what day it thinks it is. It's not talking to anything.
"Then turn it off," Hawk said.
Khan hesitated. If I kill power, we lose everything. No chance to work out what it did. Hawk stared at the flickering LEDs. He felt the heat rising off the casing. Metallic, wrong. Shut it down before it shuts us down. Khan swallowed, keyed in a command. The lights winked out. The hum stopped. The desert swallowed the silence.
"Boss," Griff called from his post. "You see the sun?" Hawk climbed back up the dune. He saw it now, higher than it should have been, burning hotter, a pale coin in a sky too wide, too clear. He checked his watch, 0625. It should have been morning light, soft and thin. Instead, the heat was building like midday in July. "Doc," Hawk called. "Hydration status." Morton stood, water bottle in hand. Men started the day topped up, but in this heat? They'll bleed it off fast. We ration now or we run dry in hours.
"Ration," Hawk ordered. 1/3 bottles until we find supply, no exceptions.
Rook finally spoke, too sharp. "Sir, where the hell are we? This doesn't look like any training area. There aren't any—" He stopped himself, but the words hung in the air anyway. Hawk cut him off before panic could root. "Doesn't matter where we are. What matters is we're alive, we're armed, and we hold position until I say otherwise. You focus on arcs, not questions.
Yes, sir, Rook said, voice clipped, cheeks flushed.
The troops settled into routine being the only thing keeping minds steady. Optics scanned, gunners adjusted belts, boots dug into sand. For long minutes, the desert gave them nothing back. Hawk lifted his binoculars again. To the south, faint dust trails smudged the horizon, too far to identify. The shimmer made them dance, ghost-like. He lowered the glass, weighing whether to tell the men. Not yet. "Boss," Evans murmured from his sniper scope. "No power lines, no roads, no towers. Just sand. This isn't Morocco, isn't Oman, isn't anywhere we've trained. Feels old."
Hawk didn't answer. He didn't need to.
The Junkers came back 20 minutes later, a different flight, lower this time. 4 aircraft, engines droning, glinting under the sun. The troop froze, eyes skyward, listening to the alien sound of radial engines echoing across the dunes. Griff spat into the sand. "That's not a typhoon, and unless someone dragged a museum piece out here, we're looking at history with teeth." No one laughed. Hawk felt his throat tighten, but his voice stayed steady. "Stay low. Stay ready. We orient first. Then we find out who else is out here."
The bombers droned past, disappearing into the heat shimmer. The desert fell silent again.
16 SAS operators in modern kit bristling with optics and lasers crouched in the sand of a war 8 decades gone, trying to convince themselves it wasn't real. Chapter 9. Signs in the Sand. The desert heat was relentless, pressing down harder with every hour. Sweat beaded under body armor, trickled into eyes, soaked webbing straps until they chafed raw. The troop hunkered in the lee of the jackals, the vehicles parked nose out in all-round defense, weapons resting on bipods, barrels glinting faintly in the sun. Nobody said it outright, but the thought hung thick in the air. This had to be part of the exercise. Some elaborate MOD deception, a test of their ability to adapt under pressure. That was easier to believe than the alternative, that the highlands had been replaced overnight by an endless desert and German aircraft that belonged in museums. "Bloody clever, I'll give them that," Griff muttered, wiping his face with a filthy rag. "Hire some reenactors, fly a few old birds from an air show, drop us in the sandbox and see if we crack. Someone in Whitehall must be laughing their arse off." Morton wasn't smiling. She poured a measured capful of water into her mouth, swilled, swallowed. Too much effort for a training serial. Aircraft like that aren't just lying around. "Distraction," Hawk cut in, his tone flat. "Doesn't matter how they pulled it off. Our job doesn't change. Stay sharp, watch arcs, conserve water." Still he couldn't ignore the unease gnawing at him. He'd been in too many theatres not to recognize terrain, and nothing about this place matched Morocco, Oman, or anywhere else the MOD had run joint lanes. The sand was different, finer, hotter underfoot. The sky itself felt wrong, sharp-edged, too wide, the kind of blue that belonged over another continent. They pressed on by foot, leaving the jackals in laager on the lee side of a dune. Hawk led with compass in hand, though the needle jittered uselessly. The men followed in staggered file, weapons at the low ready, boots sinking in the sand. It didn't take long to find the first sign. Morton spotted it, half-buried steel, jagged and rusted, jutting from a shallow dune like the bones of some dead animal. Hawk waved the line down and approached, crouching low. He brushed sand away with his glove. Letters appeared, stenciled white, faded nearly to nothing. RAF. "Christ," Griff whispered, peering over his shoulder. "This thing looks older than my dad." It was the tail section of a fighter, twisted, scorched, eaten by decades of wind. Hawk stared at it, jaw tight. Training exercise or not, this wasn't staged. He knew how wreckage aged, and this hadn't been planted last week. They pushed further. Another half-kilometre brought them to something worse. Tracks, dozens of them, tank tracks crisp in the sand, like caterpillar treads pressed by massive weight. Hawk crouched and ran his gloved hand along the grooves. Sharp edges, no weathering, no softness. These weren't old. "Looks like they moved through here yesterday," Evans murmured, lying prone with his rifle, eyes sweeping the horizon. "Tanks where?" Rook asked. His voice wavered despite his effort to keep it level. "We've seen no dust, no engine noise." "Could be part of the game," Griff said, but his tone lacked conviction. Hawk didn't answer. His eyes followed the track lines into the haze until they vanished. His gut told him tanks had passed through recently, and that whoever crewed them wasn't far. They found more wreckage before the sun reached its peak, burned-out truck husks, their frames skeletal, wheels melted into slag. A machine gun lay on its side in the sand, barrel bent, feed cover torn open. Hawk lifted it, turned it in his hands. The design was unmistakable, a Vickers K gun, RAF issue. Morton stared at it, brow furrowed. Where the hell would they even get one of those? MOD museum, Griff said, half-hearted. Drag it out, plant it here, get inside our heads. But his usual grin was gone. Hawk dropped the gun back in the sand. He looked out over the barren plain, heat shimmering, tracks leading away into nothing. His troop was sweating, tired, unnerved, but they were still soldiers. They'd keep scanning, keep covering arcs, because that was what they did. Form perimeter, Hawk ordered. We hold here, we observe, we wait. If this is a game, we don't give them the satisfaction of blinking first. If it isn't, he let the words hang unfinished.
The men moved without hesitation, rifles steady, optics sweeping.
But Hawk felt it deep in his bones, wreckage, tracks, heat, aircraft in the sky that belonged to another century. Something was wrong, and they hadn't even scratched the surface. Chapter 10. First Contact. The sun was high and merciless by the time they saw movement on the horizon. Heat shimmer danced across the sand, bending the shapes into mirages, but Hawk's binoculars cut through enough of it to confirm vehicles. Slow, boxy silhouettes grinding forward in a staggered line. Dust plume, 2 o'clock, 6 clicks out, Evans called from the dune crest. His voice was low but certain. Not civvy, armor, maybe trucks. The troops snapped to readiness, rifles angled, optics scanning. Griff slid behind his GPMP, sand pouring off the bipod legs as he set it into the slope. Morton passed bottles along the line, rationing swigs even as her eyes stayed locked on the shapes. Through the glass, Hawk watched the convoy crawl closer. 4 trucks, canvas-topped, 2 tanks, no mistaking the riveted turrets and squat frames. He breathed once, steadying. He knew that silhouette. Matilda. 2 infantry tanks, World War II relics. Except they weren't relics. They were moving, tracks clanking, exhaust spilling black into the desert sky. "Boss," Rook whispered, voice tight. "Tell me those are museum pieces." "Hold arcs," Hawk ordered. His voice was calm, though his stomach knotted. The vehicles closed the distance. Hawk counted soldiers riding in the backs of the trucks, khaki uniforms, puttees wrapped round their ankles, Lee Enfield rifles slung across shoulders. Tin helmets caught the sun in hard flashes. Their faces were lined, dusty, sunburnt, British troops but from another war. The convoy halted about 300 meters out, dust settling around them. The Matildas held position, turrets angled squarely at the jackals. The trucks disgorged men who fanned out into a loose skirmish line. One officer, tall, moustached, revolver on his hip, strode forward, swagger stick in hand. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust, his Sam Brown belt gleaming. He stopped halfway between the lines, cupped his hands, and bellowed in clipped English that carried across the sand. "You there! Identify yourselves! This is His Majesty's Desert Command. Who in God's name are you?"
Silence hung. The SAS troops stayed prone, weapons trained, sweat running in rivulets down their faces.
Hawk climbed slowly to his feet, carbine low but ready, and stepped clear of the dune. He raised one hand, palm open. "Major James Havisham, Special Air Service Regiment," he called back. His voice was steady, projecting across the distance. "We're British." The officer's head jerked at the words, confusion plain even at range. He barked something to the men behind him, who tightened their line, rifles raised. "Special what?" the officer shouted. Hawk didn't answer immediately. His mind raced. The SAS didn't even exist in the desert in 1941, not yet, not in the way he knew it. These men had never heard the name. Behind him, Griff muttered into the net. "Boss, this is going to be fun." The Matildas clanked forward another 20 yards, engines growling, guns steady. Dust swirled between the two forces. The officer called again, voice sharper now. "Drop your arms and step forward. You'll explain yourselves under guard. Fail to comply, and you'll be fired upon." Hawk stood alone in the open, sand shifting under his boots, his troop hidden behind rifles and optics. He felt 16 sets of eyes on his back, waiting for the call. He had seconds to choose: surrender, bluff, or fight. He raised his voice, strong and level. "We are British soldiers," Hawk said, "and we're here to help you fight a war." The officer stared across the gap, moustache bristling, eyes narrowing. Behind him, the Matilda's turrets tracked slightly, the rifles of his men shifting uneasily. The desert held its breath. Chapter 11. Standoff. The two lines faced each other in the glare of the desert sun, heat wavering between them like a curtain. The Matildas clanked in place, turrets steady on the jackals. British infantry crouched with Lee Enfields raised, sweat darkening khaki collars, eyes sharp beneath steel helmets. Hawk stood in the open, palm raised, every sense alive to the tension. One wrong twitch, and the sand would erupt in fire. "I'll ask again," the officer bellowed, moustache bristling. "Who are you, and what unit do you claim?" "Major James Havisham, Special Air Service," Hawk called back. "British Army, we're here to fight the same enemy you are." The officer scoffed, voice cutting. "Special what? Never heard of it. And I know every regiment in theatre. Where's your battalion? Where's your paperwork?" Hawk held his ground. "We're an experimental detachment. That's all I can say. If you want proof we're British, ask me something only a British officer would know."
The officer's eyes narrowed. "Very well. Where did you commission?"
"Sandhurst," Hawk replied without hesitation. The officer barked back. "Anyone can say that." "What grounds did you train on?" Hawk felt the sun burning into his back, but he let the memories come, sharp and clear. Brecon beacons, 20 miles across ridges that break men before breakfast. Senny Bridge for live fire. Stretches of Salisbury Plain, chalk, mud, and tanks rolling through like they own it. And the dreary, endless rain at Otterburn, where you freeze half to death waiting for a firing order. The officer froze. The names hung in the desert air like signals only a countryman could send. Hawk pressed on. "Those places chew up lads who think soldiering is just drill and spit polish. You'll know them if you've been there. They don't change."
For the first time, the officer faltered. His stick dropped slightly, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion but in recognition. He turned his head toward the men behind him, voice lower, uncertain. "Brecon! Senny Bridge! Bloody Salisbury chalk!"
One of the older sergeants nodded, muttering, "I remember the plain, sir. Mud up to your waist if you chose the wrong track." The officer snapped back to Hawk, testing once more. "And the mess at Sandhurst, what's the motto above the hall?"
Hawk didn't blink. "Serve to lead." The officer's jaw worked. The stick lowered another inch. The rifles of the infantrymen dipped, not much, but enough to show the moment had shifted.
"You could still be liars," the officer said, but the edge in his voice was dulled now. "But you talk like an officer, like one of ours." "We are yours," Hawk said firmly. Kit looks different, accents sound different, but we're British through and through. Put us in front of the enemy and you'll see it." For a long moment the officer stared across the sand, moustache twitching in thought. Finally, he raised his chin. "Very well. You'll come with us to command. The colonel will decide your fate. Until then, you're under my eye." The rifles lowered further. The Matilda turrets shifted back a fraction. The desert eased, but only just. Hawk gave the hand signal. "Mount up," he ordered over the net. "Weapons low, safety's on. We go as guests, not prisoners."
As his men climbed into the jackals, Hawk stayed standing, eyes fixed on the officer. For the first time since they'd rolled out of the mist, Hawk felt a crack in the impossible. Shared mud, shared rain, shared training grounds. They were bridges across decades.
The officer gave a curt nod, moustache stiff as wire. Not trust, not yet, but the first sliver of belief. Chapter 12. The Long Drive. The desert swallowed the sound of engines, each note carried flat across the sand. The convoy rolled in two lines, the old and the new, shoulder to shoulder. Matildas clanked forward with steel tracks grinding over dunes, their stubby guns rocking in rhythm. Behind them, Bedford trucks rattled, springs groaning under the weight of khaki-clad troops. Beside and behind, the jackals purred, diesel engines smooth and quiet, suspensions flexing easily over the sand. It was like 2 centuries had collided and then agreed, begrudgingly, to move in the same direction. Hawk stood half out of the hatch of the lead jackal, helmet tilted low against the sun, eyes scanning the ridgelines. His carbine lay across his chest, safety on but hand never far from the selector. He caught the looks from the British infantry riding in the Bedford beds, stares half curiosity, half suspicion. Some pointed openly at the vehicles, others at the rifles slung across his men's shoulders. Griff caught one such stare and bared his teeth in a grin, tapping the receiver of his GPMP with exaggerated affection. "You like her?" he mouthed, his words lost under the thrum of engines. The squaddy across the way blinked, scowled, then leaned back into his bench, muttering to his mates. Morton sat in the second jackal, watching through narrowed eyes. "They look at us like we're ghosts," she said over the intercom. "Better ghosts than spies," Hawk replied. "Let them wonder." The road, if it could be called that, was little more than faint tracks worn through the sand. The Matildas cut their way forward with slow inevitability, raising a dust cloud that stuck to everything. Hawk wiped his lenses, felt grit scrape under the cloth. In the rear vehicle, Khan sat hunched over the dormant quantum box. He had powered it down as Hawk had ordered, but he still watched it like a snake in a sack. The LEDs remained dark, yet he swore he could feel something beneath the casing. A vibration, faint but alive. Evans and Doyle, rifles across their knees, whispered between themselves, eyes flicking to the skyline. Evans muttered, "You'd never get a clean shot off those trucks. No mounts, no optics, no nothing."
"Different war," Doyle answered. "Different rules."
The column slowed as the Bedford ahead lurched over a dune. Hawk felt the tempo shift. The difference in technology was stark. The jackals could have run circles around the lumbering tanks and trucks, but now they moved at the pace of the slowest, idling in low gear, engines almost bored. Rook shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes locked on the Matilda ahead. "Sir," he said over the net, "they're running armor like it's 1918. I don't understand how they're supposed to fight with that." "They fought with what they had," Hawk answered curtly. "And they paid for it in blood."
The officer from earlier, the one with the moustache and stick, rode in the command truck. Every so often he turned, binoculars in hand, studying the jackals as if the weight of his gaze alone might strip their secrets. Hawk didn't look away when their eyes met across the dust.
The desert stretched on, heat, shimmer, blurred the line between earth and sky. Sweat cut paths through the grime on men's faces. Finally, faint shapes emerged in the distance. Tents, vehicles, a scatter of antenna masts. A divisional command post, dug in behind a low ridge, sandbags piled high around radio trucks and artillery pits. Even from afar, Hawk could see the bustle, dispatch riders kicking up dust, clerks hunched over tables, officers striding with maps under their arms. As the convoy drew closer, every head turned. Troops stopped what they were doing to stare at the jackals rolling in beside the Bedfords. Whispers spread like fire across the camp. Hawk stayed half out of his hatch, carbine across his chest, scanning the crowd. He saw disbelief, suspicion, even a flicker of awe in some faces. The moustached officer climbed down from his truck, straightened his belt, and gestured sharply. "You'll speak to the colonel." Now, Hawk nodded once, then keyed the net. "Stay tight." Eyes open. We're walking into the lion's den. The jackals purred to a halt beside sandbag walls, modern weapons bristling against a backdrop of khaki uniforms and canvas tents. For the first time since leaving the mist, Hawk felt the weight of history pressing down like the heat itself. The war they had learned about in books was suddenly alive all around them. And now they had to convince its commanders they weren't madmen or traitors. Chapter 13. Divisional Command. The tent was stifling, the kind of heat that stuck to the lungs and dulled thought. Canvas walls glowed in the midday sun, sweat dripping down the seams where night's cool had long since burned away. A faint put-put-put of a petrol generator bled through from outside, just enough to power a wireless set that crackled in the corner. Clerks in rolled-up sleeves hammered at typewriters, flies buzzing thick around their ink-stained desks. Hawk stood at attention in the center, dust still on his smock, carbine slung but in plain sight. Outside, his troop remained with the jackals, surrounded by wide-eyed infantry who alternated between awe and suspicion at weapons that looked like nothing they had ever handled. Behind the desk sat Colonel Richard Pembroke, Desert Rat's insignia on his sleeve, map pins scattered in front of him like shrapnel. His eyes were sharp and pale, scanning Hawk with the detached weight of a man who had judged lives and battles by instinct alone. Beside him stood Major Cunningham, the moustached officer Hawk had first met. Arms folded, glare unrelenting. Pembroke's voice was clipped, each word deliberate. "Major James Havisham, you said, Special Air Service Regiment. You understand I've never heard of such a formation." "Yes, sir," Hawk replied evenly. "We're new." Deep penetration, long-range raids. Not every commander is cleared on the name yet. Cunningham snorted. A likely story. Germans put on English accents well enough. Pembroke raised a hand, silencing him without a glance. His eyes never left Hawk. "So tell me. If you are British, prove it. Anyone can parrot place names. Convince me you've lived it." Hawk met his gaze. "At Brecon, it isn't the distance that breaks men. It's the climbs that tear your lungs apart before dawn. At Salisbury, the chalk dust coats your teeth and gear for weeks, even after you leave. And Otterburn? Every lad remembers the cold, but the ones who've been there know the silence. That pause before a target pops when your trigger finger itches and you pray you don't fire early. That's the kind of detail you can't fake."
A muscle worked in Pembroke's jaw. He'd felt the same mud and sleet himself. For the first time, his rigid posture eased, if only slightly.
He pressed once more, voice quieter. "And Sandhurst? What is it they burn into you there before you ever touch a battalion?"
Hawk's answer came without hesitation. "That rank isn't privilege. It's responsibility. You serve to lead, sir. Always."
Silence hung, broken only by the clack of typewriter keys. Cunningham's glare wavered just for a moment. Pembroke leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk. "You speak like an officer, and you carry yourself like one. But your rifles, your machines, they don't belong in this desert or this war Why should I believe they're not German tricks?
Hawk nodded once to Griff, who stepped forward and laid an L119A2 across his palms. Hawk gestured to it. This is ours. Fires fast, clean and true. More reliable than any bolt action. It isn't German, it isn't Italian, it's British. Just ahead of its time.
Pembroke studied the weapon, eyes narrowing, then looked back at Hawk. Ahead of its time. That's a dangerous phrase.
Dangerous or not, it wins fights, Hawk said evenly. You don't need to believe the story. Just let us prove it. Give us one raid, one chance, judge us on results.
The clerks had stopped typing. Even the wireless operator had turned in his seat, headset slack around his neck. The tent felt smaller, hotter. At last, Pembroke leaned back, cane tapping against his boot. One chance. You'll operate under my orders. You'll strike a target of my choosing. If you succeed, we'll speak again. If you fail, or if I find you're playing me false, you'll be shot as spies. Clear?
Yes, sir, Hawk said.
The colonel's eyes lingered on him, weighing, then flicked to Cunningham. Keep them under watch. If they step out of line, you end it.
Yes, sir, Cunningham replied, though his voice carried less certainty than before.
Pembroke turned back to Hawk. Very well. Welcome to the desert, Major Havisham. Let's see what your special regiment is really worth. Chapter 14, Among the Ranks. The air outside the command tent was no cooler, but it felt like release after the stifling weight inside. Hawk stepped back into the glare and dust, eyes adjusting to the harsh light. The first thing he saw was his men, still in position by the jackals, weapons slung but eyes sharp, scanning arcs the way they would in Helmand or Basra. The second thing he saw was the crowd. Dozens of khaki-clad British infantry had gathered around the jackals. They kept their distance at first, but curiosity pulled them closer in slow steps. Men in puttees and tin helmets stared openly at the angular vehicles, at the optics, at the unfamiliar rifles strapped across modern vests. It was as if museum exhibits had rolled out of the sand and parked themselves in their camp. Griff leaned on his GPMP, grinning like a man at a fairground. This one's called the General. Eats belts faster than you drink tea, he told a gawking private who couldn't take his eyes off the weapon's bulk. The young soldier reached out a tentative hand before his sergeant barked at him to pull it back. Morton crouched by her med-kit, repacking supplies with neat hands, but she was being watched too. A lance corporal peered over her shoulder at the tourniquets and vacuum-packed dressings. "What are those?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Things that save lives," she said, without looking up. "And you'll wish you had them." Rook was surrounded by 3 squaddies who kept pointing at the jackal he commanded. "Where's the armor?" "These things wouldn't last a minute against a parquet gun," one muttered. Rook tried to explain suspension travel and mobility over protection, but the words seemed to bounce off men who only trusted steel plate and rivets. Khan sat on the tailgate of his jackal, arms folded, glaring at the dormant quantum box. A corporal approached, frowning at the sealed black case. "What is that, then? Some sort of wireless?" Khan's reply was sharp. "It's something you don't touch." The corporal backed away, unsettled. The contrast was stark. The World War II men carried bolt-action Lee Enfields, Brens, boys' anti-tank rifles with cracked paint. Their kit was frayed webbing, enamel mugs tied to belts, water flasks dented from hard use. Next to the SAS with plate carriers, hydration packs, multicam, and weapons bristling with rails, they looked like ghosts from different wars. And yet they all wore the same flag. Hawk walked between the groups, watching the 2 worlds orbit one another. Some of the older NCOs kept their suspicion hard in their eyes, muttering about spies and trickery. But others, especially the younger privates, looked on with awe, whispering about the silencers, the night vision rigs, the vehicles that seemed built for a future desert they hadn't imagined. Evans muttered quietly at Hawk's side, "We stand out like bloody Martians." "That's the point," Hawk said. "Let them stare. By tonight they'll be wondering whether we're the edge they've been missing." The crowd shifted as Major Cunningham strode from the tent, moustache stiff, expression sour. He barked at the infantry to clear back, then jabbed his stick at Hawk. "Your colonel wants a briefing in an hour," he snapped. "Target details, maps, the lot. Until then, keep your men under control. You're not here to parade."
Hawk didn't flinch. "My men are under control. Can you say the same for yours?" Cunningham's eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. He spun on his heel and stalked off.
The men around the jackals melted back under the bark of sergeants, though their stares lingered. Hawk let his eyes follow Cunningham until the officer was gone, then turned back to his troop. He kept his voice low, just for them. "We've bought a seat at the table. One raid, one chance to prove ourselves. We make it count, or this ends with us in a trench instead of a barracks. Clear?" 16 heads nodded, grim and silent. For a moment, Hawk looked across the camp. Trucks, tents, Matildas, soldiers in khaki, moving with the weary routine of men who had been at war too long. They were strangers in this time, outsiders, but for now they were part of it. Chapter 15. Preparing the Edge. The sun had begun to slide westward, but the heat still clung to the camp like a fist. The SAS troop worked around their jackals in practiced silence, the rhythm of preparation's second nature. Weapons stripped and cleaned, optics checked, batteries swapped, hydration packs refilled. The World War II infantry didn't bother to hide their stares this time. They hovered in loose knots just beyond arm's reach, pretending to be on errands or maintenance, but unable to look away. It was as if the future had parked itself on their parade square. Griff sat cross-legged by the GPMG, the weapon broken down into neat rows of components on a tarp. His hands moved quick and sure, wiping carbon from the feed tray, running a brush through the barrel. A young Tommy leaned forward, eyes wide. "What's that, then?" "Looks like a Vickers, only different."
Griff gave him a crooked grin. "This one doesn't need a team of 6 and a water can to keep it going. Lighter, faster, meaner, spits lead at twice the rate. You point, it chews." The lad whistled low, earning a cuff from his sergeant. "Ignore him, Miller. Half the stuff they've got's probably smoke and mirrors."
Still, the boy's eyes lingered. Morton had her med-kit laid out like a surgeon's tray. Bandages in vacuum packs, shears that folded down to nothing, syringes capped in sterile plastic. An older corporal crouched near her, frowning at the sight. "Where'd you get all that?" "We're still carrying bloody shell dressings."
Morton didn't look up. "We get it issued because our commanders realized men bleed out if you don't stop it quick. You could do with some of these."
The corporal shook his head. "If wishes were bullets." He drifted off, but not without one last glance at the tidy rows of kit. Evans and Doyle cleaned their sniper rifles under a canopy, long bolts sliding smooth, suppressors lined up on a mat. A group of non-commissioned officers stood back, muttering among themselves. One finally stepped forward, pointing at the Schmidt and Bender optic. "That scope, it looks like something off a ship." "You can see what with it?" "More than you can with your irons," Evans said, dry. "I can put a round in a helmet at 800 if the wind's kind." The NCO's face tightened, disbelief warring with grudging curiosity. Meanwhile, Khan fussed over radios and tablets, checking encryption, running diagnostics. To the watching World War II signalers, the sight of sleek, handheld units with backlit displays was enough to spark open whispers. One even crossed himself under his breath, muttering about witchcraft. Hawk moved among his men, saying little, just watching. He could feel the gulf as wide as the desert around them. His troop were calm, methodical, clinical. The men in khaki were jittery, half in awe, half unsettled. At one point a lance corporal stepped forward, emboldened, and tapped the side of a jackal. "What armour's this, then? Doesn't look thicker than a lorry door."
Rook answered before Hawk could. "No armour? We live by speed, not steel. You see the enemy first, you hit him before he knows you're there, and you don't stay long enough for him to reply."
The lance corporal blinked. "That's not fighting, that's—" "Surviving," Rook cut in. His voice was flat. The young man frowned but didn't argue further. By the time the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the camp, the jackals gleamed with readiness. Weapons cleaned, ammunition stowed, optics zeroed. 16 modern soldiers stood in the middle of a 1941 war, their preparation a ritual that the older army could only half understand. And yet the Tommies kept watching, unable to turn away, as if by looking they might glimpse something of the future. Chapter 16. Mess Tent. Questions. The mess tent smelled of sweat, bully beef, and wood smoke. Canvas walls sagged under the weight of dust and heat, lanterns throwing yellow light across trestle tables scuffed by years of use. Tin mugs clattered, spoons scraped, and a low murmur of voices filled the space. The SAS troop had been given a corner table close enough to be watched, far enough to keep them from blending in. They sat with their trays of rations, strips of corned beef, hard biscuits, lukewarm tea, and ate without fuss. For men used to ration packs in war zones, the fare wasn't new, but every mouthful was taken under eyes that lingered too long. The other soldiers drifted closer in twos and threes, curiosity outweighing orders to leave the newcomers alone. They leaned on benches, mugs in hand, staring openly at the kit piled at the SAS men's feet, carbines stacked neat, helmets clipped with NVGs, hydration tubes coiled like snakes. Finally, one private cleared his throat. "Where'd you lot come from, then?" "Never seen uniforms like that. Looks like canvas stitched by tailors, not quartermasters." Griff smirked over his mug. "If only. Costs more, tears just the same. Sweat still stinks it out in a day." That drew a ripple of nervous laughter, but the eyes didn't move away. Another soldier pointed to Morton's vest, where trauma shears poked from a pouch. "Those scissors, what are they for?" Morton chewed, swallowed, and said flatly, "Cutting clothes off when someone's bleeding out. Faster than fumbling with belts and webbing. Means the difference between life and death."
The soldier blinked. His mates shifted uncomfortable, but no one argued.
Across the table, Evans was fielding questions about his rifle. 800 yards, you said? With that glass on top.
"More if I feel generous," Evans said, deadpan. Doyle gave a faint grin and added, "He once put 2 through a window slit narrower than your mug, and the man inside didn't even get to finish his smoke." The Tommies muttered, doubtful, but half convinced by the calm way it was said.
It didn't stop there. Questions spilled out, some cautious, some bold. "Those vehicles of yours, where's the armour? Why the curved magazines? Brens and Enfields use straights. You lot don't shave in the field?" Thought King's regs were clear. Hawk let his men handle most of it. He listened, measuring the tone. Some of the rankers were suspicious, voices sharp. Others were awed, leaning forward with questions like schoolboys at a fairground. Eventually, a sergeant with weathered skin and a voice like gravel leaned in close, mug in hand. "You speak like us, Major. You know the grounds we trained on, but you carry yourselves different. You fight different. I've seen men bluff, but this isn't bluff, so tell me, what are you really?" The mess tent quieted a notch, as if the question had drawn a line everyone wanted crossed. Hawk met the sergeant's gaze. "We're soldiers, same as you. We bleed the same. We bury our mates the same. The only difference is the kit on our backs and the training that got us here. That's all you need to know."
The sergeant studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough." He drained his mug and walked off.
The silence broke. The tent filled with chatter again, though the glances lingered and the whispers would not stop. Morton leaned in, voice low enough only Hawk heard. They'll never stop asking. Not until we show them in the field. Hawk nodded, pushing away his empty tray. And tomorrow they'll get their show. Chapter 17. The Briefing. The command tent sweltered under the lantern light, shadows shifting over a table littered with maps, aerial sketches, and half-empty mugs. Colonel Pembroke stood at its head, cane tucked under one arm, his senior officers ranged behind him. Hawk entered with Griff and Morton at his side, the rest of the troop held outside under Cunningham's suspicious watch. Pembroke didn't waste time. He stabbed his cane at the map spread before them. Here. An Italian supply depot on the Via Balbia, 40 miles west. Fuel, ammunition, rations, all feeding Rommel's armour. Lightly fortified, yes, but on open ground. My last patrol tried a hit and run 2 weeks ago. We lost half the men before they could reach the perimeter. He paused, eyes hard. It is, in plain terms, not the sort of target a small unit should be able to crack. Griff leaned closer, scanning the sketches. Enemy strength? A company of Italian infantry at least. Trucks, light guns, sandbag positions. Pembroke rapped his cane on the crates marked in pencil. Enough firepower to blunt any raid. A squad of your size, Major, would be wiped out before they broke the wire. That's not speculation, that's experience. Cunningham seized on it, voice sharp. Exactly, sir. They claim to be some phantom regiment, but no handful of men, whatever they carry, could storm and destroy a depot like that. It's lunacy to even consider it.
Pembroke turned slowly to him, expression like flint. You think I don't know that? I've bled enough men in this desert to understand the odds, which is precisely why I'm handing it to them. If these strangers are what they claim, they'll do the impossible. If not, the desert swallows them and nothing changes. The words hung in the heat. Even Cunningham faltered, his jaw tightening.
Morton broke the silence, her eyes fixed on the penciled outlines of tents and fuel drums. What about air cover? Pembroke's mouth pressed thin. The Luftwaffe patrols the coast. You'll have to be ghosts, seen, and you'll be torn to pieces before dawn. Hawk bent over the map, tracing the perimeter with a gloved finger. His voice was steady. You're right, Colonel. No conventional patrol could take it, but we aren't conventional. Give us freedom to run this our way, and by morning those fuel dumps will be ash.
Pembroke studied him for a long moment, cane resting on the table, lantern light hard on his face. Then he nodded once, curt. Very well. You get your chance, but bring me proof. Photographs, wreckage, something more than words. If you fail, or if I find this is a trick, you'll hang as spies. Hawk met his eyes without flinching. Understood, sir.
Pembroke tapped the map one last time, the sound sharp as a rifle bolt. Then God help you, Major. You leave tonight. Chapter 18. Night Prep. The desert evening came quickly, the horizon bleeding orange into violet before the stars began their slow watch. In camp, lanterns flickered to life, and shadows stretched across canvas and sand. Orders rippled through the lines, vehicles checked, patrols readied, sentries rotated, but all eyes kept drifting toward the jackals. The SAS troop worked like a machine. Each man knew his lane, his kit, his timing. Weapons were broken down, cleaned, reassembled. Magazines loaded with quick, practiced motions. NVGs checked, optics zeroed against makeshift targets propped at the edge of camp. Hydration bladders filled, rucksacks packed tight. The World War II soldiers hovered in small groups, pretending to busy themselves with their own kit while sneaking glances. Their own routine, bolts oiled on Enfields, webbing adjusted, bayonets sharpened, looked like something from another age beside the quiet efficiency of the SAS. Griff laid out belts for the GPMG across the bonnet of his jackal, the metallic links glinting in the lantern light. 300, 600, 900? If they don't like it, we'll keep feeding it till they do. His grin was wide, but his hands moved with precision. Morton checked her med pack for the 5th time, vacuum seals pressed, trauma dressings stacked. A lance corporal edged close, staring at the tourniquets and syringes. "Never seen anything like that," he muttered. "We use shell dressings, bit of tape if we're lucky." Morton glanced up, voice level. "Luck doesn't stop bleeding. Pressure and kit do. That's why my lads come back breathing."
The corporal said nothing, just backed away, chewing on the words.
Evans and Doyle adjusted their rifles under a low tarp, suppressors gleaming like polished steel. A sergeant crouched near, shaking his head. "Scopes on rifles. Never thought I'd see the day. Could do with those against Jerry's machine gun nests." Doyle looked up. "You don't need them, Sarge. You need men who'll stay calm long enough to use them."
The sergeant grunted but didn't argue.
Rook supervised the loading of ammo crates into the jackals, his voice clipped and sharp. "Rounds first, medgear second, rations last, weight balanced, nothing rattles, nothing shifts. This isn't a supply run, it's a hit and run."
The World War II soldiers standing nearby whispered among themselves. One finally spoke, half awed, half mocking. "You lot act like you're going to war on Mars." Rook didn't look up. "Feels like it, doesn't it?"
By the time the last star cut sharp against the night sky, the SAS were ready. 16 men, weapons checked, engines primed, radios whispering quietly in the dark. Hawk walked a final circuit, checking every man, every vehicle. He paused by Griff, by Morton, by Evans, saying little more than a nod, a hand on a shoulder. He could feel the camp's eyes on him, on all of them, the suspicion, the disbelief, the unspoken wager that these strangers wouldn't return. At the edge of the camp, Major Cunningham stood with arms folded, moustache bristling, watching like a hawk circling carrion. He leaned close to one of his officers, voice carrying just enough. "Mark my words, they won't come back. No small unit takes a depot like that." Hawk caught the words but didn't react. He looked at his troop instead, every man calm and ready, faces set hard in the lantern light. "Mount up," he said quietly. Engines turned over, low growls rumbling against the night. The jackals rolled forward in silence, their profiles black against the stars, the weight of both history and skepticism pressing down with every yard they left behind. Chapter 19. Before Departure. The jackals idled at the edge of the camp, engines rumbling low, exhaust curling in the cool desert night. The men sat ready, silhouettes against the starlight, their eyes fixed outward into the dark, where the Via Balbia waited. Hawk dismounted and walked back toward the command tent, boots crunching on sand. Colonel Pembroke was there already, a lone figure outlined by lantern light, cane in hand, his tunic unbuttoned at the collar. He didn't look up as Hawk approached, just kept studying the desert horizon as though he could already see the depot burning. "You're really going?" Pembroke said quietly, not turning. Hawk stopped beside him. "You gave us the target, sir?" "We'll take it." Pembroke finally looked at him, face unreadable. "Understand this, Major. No squad of 16 men has ever succeeded in tearing the heart out of a depot under guard. My patrols bled for that lesson. Men I knew by name, men I buried myself. If you fail, you won't just die. You'll prove my doubts right, and I'll have wagered on fools." Hawk kept his tone level. "We don't plan to fail. We've trained for raids like this, over and over. We know how to move fast, how to cut deep, how to vanish before the enemy knows what hit them."
Pembroke's gaze sharpened. Words. The desert eats words. I've seen fine speeches shrivel in the sand. What I need is fire and wreckage. Photographs, if you can manage it. Anything I can carry back to GHQ to prove this wasn't a fantasy?
Hawk nodded. You'll have it. Pembroke studied him for a long moment. His voice dropped just above a whisper. And if by some miracle you succeed, you'll have earned more than my ear. You'll have earned my trust. Don't squander it.
For a brief instant, the Colonel's eyes softened just enough to betray the weight he carried, the burden of command, the memory of men lost, the gnawing doubt that his war was slipping beyond his control.
Hawk held his gaze. We'll bring you a miracle, sir. Pembroke straightened, mask of iron sliding back over his features. He tapped the cane against his boot. Then go. The desert waits and dawn won't. Hawk gave a curt nod, then turned and walked back to the waiting jackals. Engines growled as he climbed aboard, dust swirling in the lantern glow. From the shadows, Pembroke watched them roll out, his officers standing silent behind him. None spoke. The only sound was the hum of machines too modern for their war, fading into the night. Chapter 20. Into the Desert Night. The glow of camp disappeared quickly, swallowed by the horizon. Soon there was nothing but sand, scrub, and sky, an ocean of black under a vault of stars, so sharp they seemed close enough to touch. The jackals moved in staggered formation, engines throttled low, tires whispering over sand and stone. Hawk sat half out of his hatch, NVGs flipped up. The devices were useless here, their glow would draw too much attention if seen. Instead he relied on the stars above, and the compass clipped to his webbing. The North Star shone steady, a fixed point among the scatter, and every few minutes he checked bearings with the luminous dial, confirming their course. Rook rode point in the lead jackal, paper map spread across his knee, shaded lamp casting the faintest glow. Pencil marks circled the depot's location based on Pembroke's sketch. He called out bearings every mile. 310 steady, adjust left 5 degrees, land ridge ahead. Evans, riding shotgun, leaned out with binoculars, eyes scanning the horizon for silhouettes. Flat ground for 5 clicks, nothing moving, no dust trails. Griff, hunched behind the GPMG, muttered into the net. Feels too clean. Where are their patrols? Italians don't just sit on their hands. Patrols don't roam every inch of desert, Hawk replied. And they don't expect lunatics driving straight at them in the dark.
The night air was cold, cutting through sweat-damp shirts. Breath fogged faintly as men exhaled. Every sound seemed magnified, the steady thrum of engines, the crunch of tires over gravel, the rattle of weapons against webbing.
To their left, faint shadows moved in parallel, Matilda's and Bedford's, Pembroke's reluctant insurance. Their tracks ground noisily through the sand, so loud Hawk wondered how the Italians hadn't already heard. He pitied them. The lumbering machines were an anchor in a war that demanded speed. Rook's voice came again, lower now. Landmark dead ahead, dry wadi cutting across, matches the map. Depot should be 15 miles beyond, bearing 325. The jackals dipped into the shallow gully, suspension soaking the drop. Dust plumed up, hanging behind them before vanishing into the night. 5 miles more I see light, Doyle whispered, binoculars raised. Bearing 330, dim, steady, could be perimeter lamps. Hawk flipped his compass again, then lifted his own glasses. Through the faint shimmer of heat and dust a glow marked the horizon, a line of tents, fuel drums stacked like silhouettes, faint movement between them. The depot. He keyed the net. There it is. Mark distance, engines down, crawl from here, no chatter unless necessary. The jackals slowed to a near whisper, rolling like shadows across the sand. The depot grew clearer with each yard, sentry lamps throwing weak halos, silhouettes pacing with rifles slung. 16 men from another century edged closer, using tools older than satellites and instincts honed across wars. Ahead waited their test, and the first chance to prove that they belonged in this desert at all. Chapter 21. First Shots. The depot lay ahead, faint lamps marking its edges, silhouettes drifting in lazy arcs between tents and stacked fuel drums. The desert carried sound oddly, a cough, a shuffle of boots, even the click of a sentry's rifle sling came sharp across the night air. The jackals had crept to within 1,000 yards before Hawk raised his hand and brought them to a halt. Engines whispered to silence, tires sinking into the sand. For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Hawk crouched in the dark beside his lead vehicle, NVGs clipped down just long enough to sweep the perimeter. He saw the wire fence, 2 strands high with gaps where it sagged. Italians, not Germans, judging by the relaxed posture of the guards and the loose discipline of their patrol. A company's worth, Pembroke had said, but most were asleep. He gave the signal. Griff moved first. He hefted the GPMG onto its pintle, the heavy barrels settling with a dull thud. Beside him, Evans adjusted his rifle, scope catching the faintest shimmer of starlight. The SAS troop spread wide, splitting into fire teams. Hawk checked his watch, then raised a closed fist. The desert snapped alive. Evans fired first, 1 round, sharp and flat, punching a sentry off his feet before he could turn his head. Almost at the same instant, Griff squeezed the trigger and the GPMG thundered, cutting a line across the wire and dropping 2 more men in seconds. From the other flank, Doyle's shots cracked in precise rhythm, picking off the guards nearest the fuel drums. The Italians reeled, rifles swinging wildly, voices shouting in alarm. Then the jackals roared back to life. Engines surged as 2 vehicles surged forward, tires biting sand, headlights still dark. Rook's gunner cut a swath with his LMG, tracers streaking red into the depot. A tent collapsed under the weight of rounds, men scrambling out and diving for cover. Morton's team lobbed flashbangs, devices alien to 1941. The desert exploded in white light and concussive shock, sending men staggering, blinded, deafened. Some screamed, clutching their faces, unable to comprehend what had hit them. Fuel drums loomed, dark silhouettes against the glow of the lamps. Hawk aimed, squeezed, and sent a stream of rounds sparking off the nearest pile. Moments later, an incendiary from Griff hit home. The explosion was instant, rolling fire up into the sky, a mushroom of heat and flame that lit the desert for miles. The depot erupted in chaos. Italians fired wildly into the night, bolts clacking, Brens chattering, but their rounds went high and wide. Against the speed and violence of the SAS assault, their defense collapsed into panic. "Keep moving," Hawk barked over the net. "Short bursts, hit and run." Jackals wheeled through the depot like hunting dogs, engines howling, gunners cutting down resistance in arcs of fire. Tents burned, crates split open, fuel drums burst in streaks of orange. The air filled with the stink of cordite, smoke, and scorched petrol. Within minutes, the depot was a storm of fire and broken voices. Italian shouts turned to screams, then to silence, broken only by the secondary detonations as more ammunition stores caught flame. Hawk raised his fist again, signaling withdrawal. The jackals peeled away in tight formation, wheels throwing sand, engines climbing into a steady growl. Behind them, the depot burned like a beacon, black smoke clawing into the starlit sky. Over the net, Griff's voice came, half triumphant, half stunned. "Depot's ash, boss. We just wrote the bloody future on their desert." Hawk didn't answer. He was watching the horizon, waiting for the inevitable reply. The engines of German armor, the drone of Luftwaffe patrols, the real fight that would test whether they survived the night. Chapter 22. The Desert Bites Back. The depot was still burning when the first counterblow came. A low rumble, faint at first, then building into a full-throated roar. Trucks, several of them, engines strained, bouncing across the sand in ragged formation. Behind them came the metallic clank of armor, Italian M13/40, and maybe something heavier. Hawk could feel the sound in his chest before he saw the dust clouds on the horizon. "Contacts! Northwest!" Rook's voice snapped over the net. Column moving fast, looks like a counterforce. Hawk turned, eyes narrowing. Faint silhouettes grew larger by the second, headlights stabbing across the desert. Trucks with infantry crammed in the back, rifles raised, shouting voices carrying across the night. "Gunners, light them up," Hawk ordered. Griff swung the GPMP onto the lead truck and squeezed, the desert lit with tracers tearing through the engine block. The truck lurched sideways, wheels kicking sand before it rolled into a ditch. Screams cut through the chaos as men spilled into the dust. Another Jackal opened fire, ripping through the flank of a second lorry. The Italians inside scattered, firing wildly into the night, bullets cracking overhead.
"Armour incoming," Evans called. Three tanks trailing the column."
The Matildas in the distance answered with their stubby main guns, flashes strobing against the horizon. Shells fell short, kicking up fountains of sand. Too slow, Hawk thought, too damned slow.
Then it happened.
A burst of Italian fire swept across the SAS line, rounds sparking off steel and stone. One cracked straight into Doyle's chest plate. He staggered back, air punched from his lungs, rifle slipping from his grip. For a heartbeat, the World War II Tommies watching from the ridge thought he was dead. Then Doyle straightened, wincing, and slapped the dented plate with a gloved hand. "Bloody hell," he wheezed. "Didn't even break the skin."
Gasps rippled through the onlookers. One lance corporal whispered, almost in reverence, "He should be in 2 pieces."
Another muttered, "What in God's name are they wearing?" Doyle bent to scoop up his rifle, voice steady again. "Next round's on me." He shouldered the weapon and fired back into the night, calm as if nothing had happened. The awe was plain on the Tommies' faces. For years they had fought with nothing but tin helmets and luck. Now they had seen a man take a bullet to the chest and walk away. But there was no time to dwell. The Italian infantry pressed hard, rifles cracking, grenades arcing clumsily into the dark. The SAS answered with precision, short bursts, disciplined fire, flashbangs that sent the enemy reeling in confusion. The armour was the real threat. The M13S crawled forward, turrets grinding, guns barking. One shell exploded close enough to flip sand over the nearest Jackal, the concussion rattling teeth. "Anti-armour, now!" Hawk barked.
Khan was already moving, shouldering the NLAW tube from the kit stow. He braced, sighted, and fired. The rocket streaked into the night, striking the lead tank square in the glacis. A fireball erupted, turret blown clean off as the wreck burned hot against the stars.
The World War II soldiers on the ridge stood frozen, mouths open. They'd seen boys' rifles bounce off those tanks. They'd lost friends to those very machines. Now, in a blink, one was nothing but burning scrap. Hawk's voice was steady, clipped, cutting through the chaos. "Keep mobile." Short bursts, shift positions, don't let them fix us.
The Jackals danced across the sand, wheels kicking dust, weapons firing in violent rhythm. More Italian trucks fell, infantry scattering into the night. A second M13 caught fire, turret jammed, crew bailing out into the flames.
But more dust trails were rising on the horizon, reinforcements. The desert was answering their raid in full measure. Hawk keyed the net, voice tight. "We've stirred the hornet's nest. Time to vanish before the Luftwaffe wakes up." Chapter 23. Rally Point. They pulled back under a veil of smoke and fire, the Jackals leading the way, Matildas and Bedfords grinding along behind like relics, straining to keep pace. The Italians had broken off at last, their burning depots still hurling flames skyward, but no one expected pursuit to be over. Not with the Luftwaffe circling somewhere above the night horizon. Hawk guided the convoy into a dry wadi 10 miles east, a shallow cut of rock and sand that offered cover from air patrols. Engines finally wound down to silence, dust drifting past them in the star-sharp dark. The SAS men dismounted fast, moving with the same precision they had when rolling into a firefight. Weapons cleared, ammo counted, optics checked. Morton made her rounds automatically, checking each man with a quick look for wounds, eyes lingering on Doyle where the armor plate was still dented. Doyle thumped it with his knuckles, forcing a grin. Felt like a hammer in the ribs. Would have been coffin wood without this kit.
A few World War II soldiers nearby stared openly. One private whispered to his mate, "I saw it hit him." Square on. Nothing living walks away from that.
Morton pulled the plate free and held it up in the lantern glow, showing the flattened slug lodged in the ceramic. He walked away because we don't wear tin on our heads and prayers on our chests. This stops bullets. That's the difference. The Tommies murmured among themselves, half awe, half disbelief. One sergeant shook his head, voice thick with a mix of envy and bitterness. We've been sending lads over the top for years with nothing but a helmet and luck. And you lot, you're from another bloody world. Meanwhile, Griff sat cross-legged cleaning the GPMG, the weapon still warm to the touch. An older corporal crouched nearby, shaking his head. Never seen anything tear through men like that. Not even the Vickers could do it so fast. Griff just grinned, feeding a new belt through. This isn't your granddad's gun. She's hungry, and I keep her fed, that's all you need to know. Khan, kneeling by his stowed NLAW tube, checked the empty launcher like it was gold. A small crowd had gathered, staring at the smouldering husk of the Italian tank still visible on the horizon. One man muttered, "We hit those things with boys' rifles point blank and the rounds just bounced." Khan's voice was calm, almost cold. "That's because you're fighting yesterday's war." "We're not." Hawk stood off to one side, watching the two groups, his men, efficient, clinical, talking little, and the Tommies, wide-eyed, whispering like they'd seen sorcery in action. The gulf between them was vast, wider than the desert itself, and yet here they were, under the same stars, bleeding in the same sand. Colonel Pembroke arrived on foot, cane in hand, his officers trailing behind. He looked from the burning horizon back to Hawk's men, his expression unreadable. At last, he spoke. "You did it," he said simply. "I didn't believe it was possible. No 16 men in this army could have done what I just witnessed. But you did." He paused, gaze flicking to Doyle, then to the ruined NLAW tube, then to the jackals idling in the wadi. His voice dropped, quieter but sharper. "And now I know for certain, you are not like any unit I've ever commanded, not British as I understand it, but not German either, which leaves me with the question I keep coming back to, what in God's name are you?" The night was silent, except for the ticking of cooling engines and the faint crack of fire in the distance. Hawk didn't answer right away. He simply met Pembroke's stare, knowing there was no explanation that would bridge the gulf. Not yet. "We're the edge you don't have, Colonel," he said at last. "Use it. Or waste it. But tonight you've seen what we are."
Pembroke held his gaze for a long, weighty moment. Then he turned back toward camp, cane tapping softly in the dust.
The question hung behind him, unanswered, as the stars turned cold above the desert. Chapter 24. Fallout. The divisional HQ was quieter than usual, though tension hung in the air like cordite. The depot raid had been a success, by every measure, but instead of celebration, the command tent simmered with doubt and unease. Colonel Pembroke sat behind his field desk, tunic off, braces hanging, cane resting against his chair. A lantern flickered on the map spread before him, throwing long shadows across the faces of the officers assembled. Major Cunningham stood stiffly to the right, moustache bristling, jaw clenched as though he were biting down words. Beside him were two staff captains, a signals officer, and the quartermaster. None had the look of men at ease. Cunningham was the first to break. "Sir, with respect, what we witnessed tonight was unnatural. 16 men with machines we don't recognize, rifles that fire like Vickers but weigh nothing, armor that shrugs off bullets, and rockets that tear tanks apart like they were paper. That isn't soldiering, it's sorcery. We cannot trust them. The quartermaster chimed in, voice tight. And what of the kit, sir? Where did it come from? Not from ordnance, not from any depot I've seen. If they're British, why are they carrying weapons no one's ever heard of?
The signals officer added his piece. And the radios, they speak to each other without distortion, even at range. I've never seen anything like it. If the Huns had anything similar, we'd be finished.
Pembroke let them speak, fingers steepled, face impassive. Only when the room fell quiet did he answer. You all saw the depot burn. You saw how they moved, how they struck. In under an hour, a company of Italians and a fuel stockpile that kept Rommel's armour moving was erased. We have never achieved such an effect with so few. That is not sorcery, gentlemen. That is capability.
Cunningham's voice rose, indignant. Capability, yes, but to what end? We cannot fight alongside men we do not understand. For all we know, they're German infiltrators with captured kit.
Pembroke cut him off, sharply. Enough, Major. If they were Germans, they'd have cut our throats last night and left our vehicles burning. Instead, they struck at the enemy with us. That alone earns them a measure of trust.
The staff captains exchanged uneasy glances. One spoke hesitantly. Even so, sir, the men are unsettled. They're talking of ghosts of time travellers, of angels dropped in from nowhere. Morale is a delicate thing. If we let these newcomers operate unchecked, the whispers could do more damage than Rommel himself.
Pembroke leaned back, eyes narrowing, voice low and deliberate. Then we control the narrative. They are British. A special detachment, newly raised, working under my authority. No more, no less. That is what the men will be told. Any man saying otherwise will answer to me. Cunningham bristled, but said nothing.
Pembroke continued, his gaze sweeping the tent. Make no mistake, these men frighten me as much as they do you. I don't know where they came from, or how they came to be here. But I know this. I have a war to fight, and they give me an edge I'd be a fool to throw away. Until they prove otherwise, they stay.
Silence, settled, heavy, and uneasy. Officers shifted uncomfortably, but none dared argue further. Pembroke tapped his cane once against the floorboards. Final. Dismissed. And remember, what you saw tonight stays within this tent. No wild stories, no speculation. We will use them, but we will not worship them. Understood?
The officers saluted and filed out, leaving Pembroke alone with his maps and his doubts. He stared at the burning mark he'd drawn over the Italian depot, the ink bleeding slightly in the lamplight.
For the first time that night he let himself whisper the thought gnawing at him since the jackals had rolled into his desert.
What if they aren't ours at all?
Chapter 25. Axis Ripples. Pembroke hadn't slept. The desert night was quiet outside his tent, but inside his wireless set hissed and crackled with fragments of news. A signals officer stood rigidly before him, headset tilted to one ear, notes scribbled on a pad. Sir, ultra intercepts are filtering through, Axis traffic out of Benghazi. They're in a panic.
Pembroke motioned for him to continue.
The officer swallowed. Italian command reports a British mechanized detachment struck the depot with weapons they can't identify. They're claiming multiple tanks destroyed in minutes, no artillery involved. One report even mentions a rocket weapon. Pembroke's cane tapped against the floor, steady, deliberate. Go on. German channels are more cautious. Abwehr signals describe it as special British raiders with new material, but they're not dismissing it. They're rerouting a Kampfgruppe from Tobruk to stiffen coastal depots. Luftwaffe flights have doubled patrols along the Via Balbia. The officer glanced up. Sir, they're rattled. Pembroke leaned over the map, studying the thick pencil lines. One depot gone, Rommel's fuel flows severed for days, but the bigger victory wasn't on paper. It was in German fear. He said quietly, almost to himself, One raid, and they're already shifting assets. Cunningham, who had insisted on being present, broke in sharply. Or it's a trap. They could be drawing us out, trying to make us chase shadows while Rommel swings the hammer elsewhere. You can't base strategy on phantoms.
Pembroke's eyes flicked up, cold. I base strategy on results. The depot is ash. The Italians bled. The Germans are reacting. That is fact, not phantom.
The quartermaster spoke from the shadows, voice hesitant. But, sir, what if they've changed the enemy's perception of us in ways we can't predict? If the Axis think we have weapons we don't, they'll adapt, hit us harder, faster. We can't follow their pace. Pembroke didn't answer right away. He traced the map, fingers pausing over the line of Rommel's advance. Finally, he said, "War is perception as much as it is shells and rifles. If they believe Britain has a blade sharp enough to cut their supply lines to the bone, then we use that belief. Whether it's smoke or steel, it buys us time." The signals officer cleared his throat. "Sir, one more report. Luftwaffe recon over the wreck. They've noted what they call strange vehicles. Not tanks, not lorries. They don't recognize the silhouettes."
The tent was silent. Pembroke tapped his cane once more. "Then the desert has seen its first ghost story. And we'll make sure they keep seeing it until they don't dare move a convoy without looking over their shoulder."
Cunningham scowled but said nothing. Pembroke leaned back, eyes on the flame of the lantern. "We'll use them again, carefully. The more the enemy fears them, the more power they have. But one thing is certain. Whatever those men are, they've already changed this war." Outside, the desert remained quiet. But somewhere beyond the horizon, German armor was grinding eastward, now wary, now hunting shadows. Chapter 26. The Next Strike. Colonel Pembroke sat alone at his field desk, the lantern's flame guttering in the draught. Around him the camp had gone quiet, but his tent was thick with smoke, maps, and unanswered questions. His cane rested by the chair, untouched. For the first time in weeks he wasn't staring at Rommel's advance with resignation, he was staring at it with possibility. A sheaf of intelligence reports lay open before him, intercepts, reconnaissance sketches, hurried notes from forward patrols. The depot raid had shaken the Axis. Supply columns were pulling back toward Tobruk, Luftwaffe patrols circling wider, armor being shifted to guard against raids they couldn't predict. The battlefield had tilted, if only slightly. But Pembroke knew Rommel. The German wasn't just a tactician, he was a predator. He wouldn't let panic harden into paralysis. He'd lash back, harder than before. Cunningham ducked into the tent without waiting to be called, his moustache as stiff as his posture. "Sir, it's madness. Using those men again will only deepen the mystery. Every whisper in camp grows louder. They aren't British, they aren't even natural. If you give them another task, you risk unraveling discipline altogether." Pembroke didn't look up from his map. "I risk more by doing nothing. Rommel pushes east, Tobruk holds only by the grace of God, and Cairo looms behind us. One more blow in the right place could stall him long enough for our reinforcements to matter."
He tapped the map with his pencil, the tip gouging a circle. "Here. An armoured column massing south of Gazala. Not Italians this time, German Panzergruppe. If it reaches the coast intact, Rommel has his spearhead. If it's cut before it strikes, he bleeds momentum."
Cunningham's voice tightened. "You propose to send them 16 men against Rommel's armour?" Pembroke finally looked up, eyes hard. "Yes, because nothing else we have can move fast enough, hit hard enough, or vanish quick enough. The Matildas crawl. Our infantry bleeds, the Desert Air Force is stretched thin, but those men, whatever they are, have already burned a depot the Italians thought untouchable. Now I'll see what they can do against Germans who think themselves invincible."
The quartermaster, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, even if they succeed, won't this paint a target on them? Rommel is no fool. He'll hunt them specifically.
Pembroke exhaled slowly, his face lined in the lantern glow. Then let him. If the desert fox wastes his time chasing 16 shadows, every hour he spends on them is an hour he isn't breaking our lines. And if my gamble buys us that, I'll spend the chips gladly. He leaned over the map, scribbling notes in the margin. Orders will be drafted. The special detachment will move at dusk tomorrow. Their target is the Panzergruppe's forward refueling echelon. Fuel and water. Without it, tanks don't move. Without tanks, Rommel has no spear. Pembroke set down his pencil, cane tapping once against the floor. His voice was quiet, but final. This will be their crucible. If they succeed, they've proved they belong in this desert. If they fail... He let the words fade, the weight of them heavy in the tent. Cunningham stepped forward, almost spitting. And when their luck ends, what then? You'll explain to GHQ that your miracle men vanished into the sand. Pembroke's eyes didn't waver. Then I'll tell GHQ the truth, that for one brief moment we had a blade sharper than anything in this desert, and we used it. That is all history will need. He dismissed them with a curt gesture. The officers filed out reluctantly, leaving Pembroke alone once more with his maps. Beyond the lantern light, the desert stretched silent and black, but he could feel the weight of what was coming. A clash, not with Italians, not with second-rate troops, but with Rommel himself. And the strangers, his ghosts, his special detachment, would be the tip of the spear. Chapter 27. The New Orders. The SAS troop gathered around the jackals under a strip of moonlight. The desert was quiet, save for the click of cooling engines and the distant mutter of Matildas still grinding into position on the horizon. Men sat on ammo boxes or leaned against their vehicles, faces shadowed, weapons propped close. Hawke stood at the centre, a folded map in his hand. Pembroke's runner had delivered it an hour ago with no ceremony, just a tight salute and a muttered Colonel's instructions. He spread it across the bonnet of the lead jackal. Pencil circles marked the south of Gazala, and a thick line of arrows swept eastward. "Here it is," Hawke said, voice low but carrying. "Our next job. German Panzergruppe massing here, Rommel's advance guard. Not Italians this time. Panzers, trucks, supply columns. Our task is simple on paper. Hit their forward echelon. Fuel, water, ammo. Bleed their spearhead dry before it can drive into the coast." The troop exchanged glances. No one spoke for a long beat. Finally Griff snorted, shaking his head. "So let me get this straight. 16 of us, a handful of jackals, against bloody Rommel himself and his pet armour?" "Sounds like a Tuesday," Doyle muttered, deadpan. Morton wasn't smiling. "Sir, this isn't a depot raid. This is a column on the move, with armour in strength. Even with our gear, we can't slug it out with tanks forever." Hawke nodded. "We're not here to slug. We're here to cut. We find the fuel, we burn it. Without petrol, his tanks don't move. Without water, his infantry collapses. We're not killing Rommel's army, we're starving it." Khan tapped the edge of the map with a gloved finger. "And what if he's there, sir?" "The man himself. The Germans call him the Desert Fox for a reason. He's no Italian colonel asleep at a depot."
Hawke's jaw tightened. "Then we fight him the way we fight anyone, fast, precise, and gone before he knows which way we came. If Rommel shows his face, we don't stay to shake his hand." The troop absorbed that in silence. The weight of the name Rommel settled over them. They'd trained to fight insurgents, terrorists, peer adversaries, but this was different. This was the myth-made flesh, the commander who had broken armies with manoeuvre and nerve.
Griff broke the silence, thumbing rounds into a belt. "Doesn't matter who he is. Fuel burns the same, tanks blow the same. If they want ghosts in their desert, we'll give them ghosts." Rook slapped the bonnet with his palm. "Then we plan it right. Entry, exit, fall back. No cowboy, or runs. We all come back this time."
Morton gave him a sharp look. "This time?"
Rook shrugged. "Figure of speech. Hawk folded the map and tucked it into his vest. He let his eyes sweep the circle of faces. 16 men, shadows against the desert, every one of them carrying the weight of history they didn't yet fully understand. "This is it," he said, quietly. "One more raid, one more strike, and then we'll see if the desert lets us go home." Chapter 28. Planning the Cut. The troop huddled beneath a canvas rigged between two jackals, a shaded island against the star-raw desert night. The map lay flat on a crate, lantern light dimmed by a cloth so it wouldn't carry. Weapons, rations, water bottles, and belts of ammo were stacked in orderly piles around them. Hawk leaned over the map, drawing lines with a stick of charcoal. "The Panzergruppe is here, massing south of Gazala. Recon says they're stretched along the wadi, fuel trucks, water bowsers, ammunition dumps. Armors forward, infantry spread in pickets. Rommel wants to be ready to move in 2 days." He tapped the charcoal against the supply icons. "That gives us a narrow window. If we can torch the fuel and cripple the water, his armor starves before it ever reaches the coast." Griff leaned back, arms crossed. "So, smash and run." "Same as before, only now Jerry's watching. He'll be sharper than the Italians."
"Which means," Hawk said, "we can't rely on surprise alone. We need angles. Approach from the south, where they'll expect sand and silence. Hit hard, fast, and then vanish east before they regroup."
Evans traced the edge of the map with his finger. "High ground here." "A ridge. If I set up with Doyle, we can cover the entry and give warning when their armor stirs." Morton glanced up from checking her med pack. "As long as the armor doesn't stir too soon. One wrong move, and we'll be facing panzers at full throttle." Rook leaned over, stabbing at the map with his pencil. "We need fallback routes. 2, not 1. 1 southeast, 1 northeast. If one's cut, we shift to the other. No improvising on the run. Clear lanes, clear times." Khan, crouched with a radio slate open across his knees, added quietly, "I can jam their short-range comms for a few minutes. Long enough to add confusion, maybe delay a coordinated counter. After that, the circuits will fry. We'll only get one shot at it." The troop digested that in silence. Every man knew how thin the margin would be. Griff finally spoke, voice low, but steady. "Rommel's boys aren't green. They'll fight like devils, but if we cut their fuel, it won't matter how sharp their claws are."
Evans smirked faintly. "Let the desert fox run on empty."
Hawk folded the map, eyes sweeping his men. "This isn't just another raid." "Pembroke wants proof. Rommel needs a bloody nose. And we need to walk away from it, all of us. Prep your kit, check your ammo. We move at dusk tomorrow." The men nodded, each in their own rhythm, some calm, some grim, some masking nerves with dry grins. They knew the odds. Outside the canvas, the desert wind stirred faintly, carrying the smell of smoke from the depot still burning far behind them. The horizon ahead was dark, hiding the mass of German armor that waited like a coiled predator.
16 men against the desert fox's teeth.
And tomorrow they would bite first. Chapter 29. Into the Wolf's Shadow. The desert swallowed them again, endless and black under the hard gleam of the stars. Engines whispered low, jackals rolling in staggered file, headlights dark. Every man was alert, eyes scanning arcs, fingers brushing triggers, breaths drawn tight and shallow. Hawk rode up front, half out of the hatch, compass on his vest, stars fixed overhead. Without GPS or satellites, they moved the old way, compass bearings, map checks under shaded lamps, and the familiar tilt of ridges etched into memory. The desert was featureless to most, but here and there, a wadi, a rise, or a cluster of rock broke the monotony. Hawk called each landmark, confirming they were on course. "Bearing 325, Rook murmured over the net from the lead jackal. "Ridge line ahead." matches Pembroke's sketch. Beyond it, German supply. Another 10 clicks. Griff shifted behind his GPMP, scanning the dark. Feels close already. Smells close. Like something's watching.
Morton's voice came calm and clipped. That's your nerves talking? Keep them in check.
The night grew colder as they pressed on. Breath misted faintly, frost forming on steel and optics. The sound of engines carried strangely in the stillness, bouncing back from unseen ridges, so each man heard echoes as if the desert itself stalked them. Evans broke the silence, low and sardonic. "You reckon Rommel's sitting out there with a glass of schnapps waiting for us to roll into his lap?"
"Rommel drinks brandy," Doyle muttered. "And if he's waiting, we'd better make him choke on it."
A ripple of dry laughter passed through the net, gone as quick as it came. The jackals crested a shallow rise. Hawk signalled a halt. Engines dropped to silence, men dismounted into the sand, boots crunching soft as they fanned out. Through binoculars, the horizon shifted. There, pinpricks of light, faint but steady. Lamps hooded to slits, trucks, tents, fuel bowsers. The bulk of armour loomed darker than the night, squat shapes of panzer hulls half hidden by camouflage nets. The Panzergruppe, asleep and alive, stretched along the wadi like a coiled predator. Hawk's jaw tightened. He keyed the net, voice low and deliberate. There it is. German forward echelon. Trucks, tanks, fuel, water. Everything Rommel needs to strike.
The troop crouched in the sand, staring at the shapes across the dark. The scale was daunting. This wasn't a company of Italians guarding a depot. This was the Desert Fox's fist, ready to close.
Griff whispered, 16 men against half a bloody army. Mad bastards, the lot of us.
Hawk felt the truth of it pressing in his chest. 16 men from another century, staring down the warlord of the desert. Their one edge was shock and speed. If they faltered, they'd vanish into history without a trace.
He lowered the binoculars, eyes sweeping the men crouched in the sand. We strike at first light, he said. One cut, fast and deep. Hit the fuel, hit the water, and vanish before they can bring the hammer down. The desert wind sighed low across the wadi, carrying the smell of petrol and dust. The jackals crouched behind the ridge like waiting hounds, engines cooling, weapons bristling in the dark. Ahead lay Rommel's armour, and soon the ghosts would bite again. Chapter 30. Ghosts in the Dark. The ridge hid them well. Beyond it, the German camp murmured faintly in the night. Snatches of conversation, the grind of a tank's turret shifting, the occasional clang of metal on metal. But the sentries were lazy, their lamps hooded, their rifles slung loose. No one expected an attack in the hours before dawn. Hawk moved along the crouched line of his men, checking each by touch more than sight. NVGs glowed faintly green against helmets, optics glinted where they caught stray starlight. They were shadows among shadows, every movement deliberate and silent. He keyed the net, voiced little more than a breath. Same drill. Teams 1 and 2 on fuel, 3 on water bowsers, 4 overwatch, in and out, no lingering. If you're seen, you burn it and move. Acknowledgements came in muted clicks, no chatter.
Evans and Doyle slithered forward first, rifles trained, scopes cutting through the dark like predator eyes. They ghosted up the slope, settling into firing nests with clean arcs over the camp. Through their lenses the Germans were clear, sentries yawning, one smoking by a drum, another scratching in the dust with his boot.
Targets painted, Doyle whispered. You're clear.
Griff moved next. GPMG hugged to his chest as he crept forward with his fire team. Hawk felt the weight of silence press harder, the knowledge that one misstep, one clink of metal could spark the night into chaos.
They reached the perimeter wire, old, rusted, sagging. Morton slipped cutters through with barely a sound, opening a gap just wide enough for men to slide through. One by one, they entered the wolf's den. The fuel trucks loomed ahead, hulking shapes under camouflage nets. Petrol drums were stacked in neat rows, gleaming faintly. Hawk felt his pulse slow, his breathing steady. This was the heart. He gave the signal. The first suppressed shots cracked through the night. Sentries dropped where they stood, silent deaths in the dust. A pair of flashbangs rolled under a truck, their blast dazzling and deafening in an instant. Shouts rang out, men stumbling blind, rifles raised too late.
Griff opened up with the GPMG tracers scything low, cutting across a row of startled infantry who had barely climbed from their bedrolls. Panic spread fast, voices rising in German, orders shouted and drowned in gunfire.
Hawk and his team slapped charges against the fuel bowsers, time fuses hissing faintly. Morton and Rook doused the nearest stacks of drums with incendiary gel, the air filling with the sharp tang of chemicals. 30 seconds, Hawk hissed. The first explosion bloomed before the count was half done. A fuel truck went up in a ball of fire, the blast rocking the wadi, heat washing across their faces. The camp erupted in confusion, men screaming, some firing into the night at shadows they couldn't see. Then the rest went. A line of fire rolled across the depot as charges and incendiaries took hold, drums bursting one by one. Flames climbed into the sky, painting the desert in rolling orange. From the ridge, Evans whispered through the net, calm as stone. "Panzer crews stirring. You've got armor moving?" Hawk didn't hesitate. "Time to vanish. Go, go, go!" The SAS scattered back through the breach, flames chasing them, Germans shouting in fury behind. The jackals roared to life, engines snarling as they tore across the sand, tires spitting dust. Behind them, Rommel's spearhead blazed, fuel and water pouring into fire. They hadn't killed the desert fox, but they had starved him. And they had done it in the dark, unseen like ghosts. Chapter 31. Rommel's Fury. Dawn broke hard and unforgiving, the desert sun dragging fire across the horizon. Smoke still curled skyward from the depot, thick and oily, the smell of burnt petrol hanging heavy for miles. Blackened fuel bowsers lay twisted in heaps, trucks gutted to skeletal frames, drums scattered like children's toys. Men moved among the wreckage in silence, some dazed, some digging frantically for survivors, others sitting blank-eyed in the sand. Rommel arrived at first light, his staff car grinding to a halt at the edge of the devastation. He climbed out quickly, boots sinking into dust, field cap tilted low against the sun. His officers trailed behind, murmuring reports, but he brushed them off with a curt gesture. He wanted to see with his own eyes. He walked slowly, cane tapping the ground, eyes sharp. The depot had been alive with fuel, ammunition, and water just hours ago. Now it was a scar in the desert, heat shimmering off pools of burning fuel, crates popping faintly as trapped rounds cooked off inside. "Not artillery," Rommel said quietly, crouching to touch the twisted remains of a Bowser. His fingers came away slick with oil. "Not airstrike, precision, fast, clean." His chief of staff, Biolane, spoke carefully. "Italian survivors say it was a raiding party, a small one. Vehicles they did not recognize, weapons unfamiliar. They claim their comrades were blinded, deafened by explosions without shrapnel. Some insist they saw rockets, handheld, not artillery."
Rommel's jaw tightened. He straightened, dusting his hand on his tunic. "You believe this?"
Biolane hesitated. "Sir, the details, they are inconsistent. Some say it was 30 men, others 50. All describe speed, fire, and ghosts."
Rommel turned, eyes narrowing. "Ghosts don't destroy fuel columns. Men do, but not men I've fought before." He swept his arm toward the wreckage. "Look around you. This was not the work of ordinary raiders. This was something new, something we were not prepared for."
Another officer stepped forward. "Herr General Feldmarschall, Should we assume this is a British secret unit? Rommel's gaze drifted back to the black smoke rising into the morning sky. He spoke slowly, voice edged with both anger and admiration. Yes, British, but not like any I have met. They are not clumsy commandos stumbling with dynamite. They are precise, disciplined, invisible until they choose to strike. He turned sharply to face his staff. Send word to all commands. Convoys are not to move unescorted. Tanks will guard fuel at all times. Luftwaffe will increase patrols over every depot and line of supply. If the British have forged a blade like this, then every man in Africa must be ready to feel it. Rommel paused, scanning the devastation one last time. His eyes lingered on a half-melted German fuel marker, charred black. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Whoever they are, they fight like the future. And the Desert Fox does not underestimate the future." He snapped back to his officers, voice hard. "Find them! Hunt them, break them. I will not let phantoms decide this war." The staff saluted. Orders rippled outward. The hunt began. Chapter 32, The Last Stand. The night after the raid was short. By the time the SAS troop had pulled back into the dunes, the desert behind them glowed with fire. They thought distance and silence would buy them safety. They were wrong. Rommel moved fast. Before dawn his orders were out, and by late morning the desert shook under the weight of panzer columns fanning east. Stukas circled overhead, their engines a constant growl in the high blue sky. Rommel wanted the phantoms found, and he unleashed everything short of an army to do it. Hawk felt it before he saw it. The tremor under his boots, faint at first, then building into a steady vibration. He lifted his binoculars and saw the dust plumes rising, a line of armor, stretched and relentless, cutting across the desert like wolves on the scent. "Company-strength armor, maybe more," Evans muttered. He spat into the sand. "They're sweeping the whole sector. Hunting us." The jackals idled in a narrow wadi, engines ticking hot. Men crouched beside them, rifles cradled, eyes on Hawk. No one needed to say what they all knew. 16 men couldn't outrun Rommel's fist forever. Hawk made the call. "We fight here." Ambush and move, short, sharp, then vanish into the rocks before they box us in. The troop went to work with professional calm. Charges planted at choke points, GPMG barrels swapped and cooled, rockets checked, safeties flicked. The kit looked alien even to themselves, shimmering under the desert sun, future steel braced for a fight in 1941. The 1st Panzer crested the rise, a Panzer III, turret swinging, hatches open as the commander scanned the ground. He never saw the rocket. Doyle's shot streaked from the ridge, punching through the hull in a burst of fire that sent the tank lurching sideways into the sand. The ambush erupted. Griff's GPMG roared, cutting down infantry bailing from lorries. Rook detonated a charge, sand and steel flying as a supply truck flipped end over end. Hawk's rifle snapped in controlled bursts, each shot precise, each target dropping in the dust. But the Germans were not green. Panzers maneuvered fast, turrets swinging, machine guns hammering the ridge line. Stukas peeled into dives, their sirens screaming as bombs smashed into the desert around them. The air turned into dust, heat, and thunder. Morton dragged a wounded World War II British scout. The young man had been caught on the flank, a stray round catching his chest. The bullet had struck the ceramic plate Hawk had forced onto him before the raid. The plate was cracked, but the man was alive. He stared at it wide-eyed, whispering, "Impossible! Impossible!" as Morton yanked him to cover. "Welcome to our world," Morton growled, shoving him flat.
The SAS fought like wraiths, striking, moving, vanishing through the haze. But the weight of armor pressed closer, the circle tightening. Every man knew it couldn't last.
Then it began. The static hum, a pressure in the air, building behind them like a storm. Radios hissed with interference, compasses spun. Khan's eyes widened over the slate on his lap. "It's happening again," he shouted. "The field, same as Scotland. It's pulling." Hawk saw it too. A shimmer in the air beyond the ridge, the sand warping, light bending as if the desert itself was tearing open. "Not yet," he barked. "Hold until it's wide. Then we move." They fought harder, every weapon spitting fire, every man burning through the last of his magazines. Another panzer went up in flames, another lorry shredded. The Germans pressed, but the ghosts would not yield. And behind them, the impossible door widened, a tunnel of light and sound forming in the desert haze. Hawk gave the final order, voice raw. "All call signs, into the breach, now!" The jackals swung toward the shimmer, engines howling, tires spitting sand. One by one they plunged into the light, tracer fire snapping at their heels. Hawk was the last, firing until the mag clicked dry, then diving after his men as the desert split wide and swallowed them whole. Behind them, Rommel's armor rolled forward into empty sand, the phantoms gone like smoke. Chapter 33. Back to the Glen. The world snapped. One moment it was fire and thunder, the desert alive with tank shells, tracer fire, and the howl of Stukas overhead. The next, silence. Cold silence. Engines idled in mist. The jackals sat in a line on damp grass, their tires wet, exhausts steaming faintly in the morning chill. The desert sun was gone, replaced by a slate-grey sky and the rolling fog of the Scottish Highlands. For a long moment no one moved. Men stared through NVGs that showed nothing but mist, fingers still tight on triggers. It was Griff who finally broke the silence. "Bloody hell!" Doyle pulled his helmet off, wiping condensation from his brow. "It's the Glen. We're back." His voice was flat, unbelieving. The troop dismounted slowly, boots sinking into wet turf. The smell hit them first. Peat, damp earth, pine carried on the wind. No petrol fires, no dust, no burnt corpses, just Scotland, as if the desert had been a fever dream. Hawk climbed out last. He stood still, letting the cold bite through him, forcing his lungs to draw in the wet highland air. It was real. They were back. Evans crouched, touching the grass with gloved fingers. He shook his head. "Minutes ago we were fighting panzers, now." He trailed off, unable to finish. Morton broke the silence again, kneeling beside one of the jackals. She lifted a dented ceramic plate, the one that had stopped the German round. The impact mark was still there, the crack running jagged across it. Proof. "Not a dream," she said firmly. "Not a story." We were there. Khan sat cross-legged in the grass, staring at the radio slate in his lap. It was dead, fried circuit still warm. "The field shut down when it spat us back. Whatever brought us there, it's gone."
Hawk scanned his men. 16 faces drawn but alive. Smoke and fire still haunted their eyes, but they were breathing, standing, whole. Against every rule of nature, they had come home.
He turned his gaze to the hills beyond, mist curling across the ridges. It was the same glen where they had started, yet not the same. They had carried another war back with them, a war out of time. "Listen," Hawk said quietly, voice carrying through the fog. "What happened stays with us. No one outside this troop will ever believe it, but we know. We cut Rommel. We changed something." Griff grinned without humor. "History'll never write our names. But maybe it'll write the crack we left in his armor." There was no laughter, only nods, quiet and heavy. The mist thickened, swallowing the jackals in white. Somewhere, a lark sang, sharp against the stillness. Hawk breathed deep one last time and said, "Mount up. We've got work here too." The engines rumbled back to life, echoing against the glen. The troop rolled forward into the fog, carrying the desert with them in silence. And behind them, unseen, the grass bent as though under a phantom wind, as if the desert itself lingered for a heartbeat before fading into nothing. Epilogue. Echoes. The desert lay quiet under the midday sun, smoke from the depot still drifting in thin black ribbons. The bodies had been buried, the wreckage marked, the reports already drafted for Berlin. Yet the questions lingered like ghosts. Rommel sat in his command tent, tunic unbuttoned, maps scattered before him. He had fought many enemies, French armour, British infantry, Soviet formations yet to come, but none like the phantoms of last night. They had struck with precision beyond anything he had imagined and vanished before he could bring his hammer down. They were few, he murmured to Violin, but they fought with the weight of many, new weapons, new tactics. If this is Britain's future, then the desert will bleed. Violin hesitated. Do you think, sir, they can change the war? Rommel's eyes stayed on the map. No single raid changes a war, but it changes men. My commanders are unsettled. My soldiers whisper of ghosts. Fear is as potent as any tank. He tapped a finger on the wrecked supply lines. We will adapt. We always adapt, but I will not forget them, whoever they were. They left their mark. Outside, the desert wind stirred the canvas, carrying ash and silence. Far away, decades later, an archivist in London opened a faded folder in the War Office files. Inside was a single-page report from Colonel Pembroke, unsigned, undated. It described a raid so sharp, so devastating, that its details had always seemed more legend than fact. No names, no unit designations, only a line in Pembroke's own hand. They came from nowhere. They struck like lightning, and then they were gone. The archivist frowned, closed the file, and slid it back into the cabinet marked Unresolved Actions, North Africa. Somewhere in Scotland, a mist curled low across a quiet glen, stirring faintly as though remembering the fire of another time. The end.